Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us all today. My name's James Locke. I'm a director at Opus Independence, who are the social enterprise in Sheffield that put on the Festival of Debate each year. Today's event rather is coordinated in partnership with the Institute for Sustainable Food at Sheffield University and the Sheffield Foods Partnership. So the Festival of Debate brings people together today to share new ideas that help shape our understanding of the world. And today's event is filled with people and organisations doing some vital and fantastical work around two related food emergencies. One of people experiencing severe precarity and poverty, and the other of deepening climate change and the urgent need to secure a low carbon and sustainable food system for the city. This year's programme is digital first, as you will be aware of. It's a pay what you feel donation event. So if you're able to, we would really appreciate any donations to make the festival continue to happen in Sheffield. And we're using the hashtag #FofD today as well. Today's event will be chaired by Gareth Roberts, Sheffield Food Partnership fame. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'd like all speakers to try and keep to their 10 minutes allocated. Also, this is a safe space, and I'll be posting our safeguarding policy into the chat shortly. So please be respectful of others in the chat. Panelists will be responding to questions from attendees in the chat as well. So if you do have any questions, please put them there. I will now pass over to Gareth Roberts.
Hello and welcome to Feeding Sheffield Sustainably. My name is Gareth Roberts, and you know, we all work from home now, and today is no different. So I'm really delighted to welcome you all for this event into our home. And yeah, this is the Roberts kitchen. And it's my wife, Elizabeth. They've just come back from the allotment. It's pouring with rain. And here's Kitty and Jack. And together, this is the suitably named the live feed. What do you think, guys?
Yeah!
Great stuff. So yeah, the live feed will be happening throughout today's event this afternoon. And yeah, I'm going to be eating and drinking, no alcohol, though that will come later on. But it seemed appropriate to bring some food and some sociability because if we weren't all in our homes staring at a screen, we would definitely all be together in the same place and enjoying food together because food's all about the eating. And I thought, what better way of bringing that aspect of today's event, hopefully alive, in my home with my family. So throughout the event, these guys are going to be preparing food, and during the intervals, there'll be no dead air. It'll be, join me and also Madam Zucchini. Madam Zucchini, are you there? Are we going to be able to see you and maybe even hear you? How can we make this happen?
Oh, we can, I think. Hello, Gareth.
Hi, Madam Zucchini. So nice to see you here today.
Yes.
Who's with you? Who's with you today?
Well, I've been listening to the themes and obviously want to be mindful of being respectful about the very important issues discussed. But it's very exciting. I have managed to get hold of none other than Greta Iceberg.
Oh, hello, Greta. Fantastic. Well, it's so nice of Greta to join us. Obviously, yes. Climate change is absolutely central to, the challenge of our food system and its sustainability, and how we respond to the climate emergency. Now, Madam Zucchini, I've actually got somebody here who would like to say something. I'm sure Greta Iceberg would be really interested to hear. So, Kitty, come and join me, and you've got something to say for everybody. Come on then, stand up, love. That's it. Well done. Right. Go on then.
This is our future, and what are you doing to save it? Well, we need sustainable food, and you need to help us with that. It's us children whose planet this is going to be. What do we want? Sustainable food. When do we want it? Now.
Woo! Thank you very much, Kitty. We're going to be hearing more from you later on. But anything to say on that, Greta Iceberg?
Marvellous. Absolutely marvellous. And
Fantastic.
If anyone has noticed that I'm not actually an iceberg lettuce, well, there's a limit to what you can get hold of when you're called on at the last minute to be involved in such things. But I'll be listening attentively, and hopefully some other colleagues will come along who can also listen, and possibly a bit of levity too, because as Gareth and I are fond of saying, food, there's loads of serious things to do, but there's also, we have the joy of food. And for me in particular, the love of vegetables. So there you are. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Madam Zucchini. And we will be talking with you throughout today's event. We'll probably see you at the interval, I think, as they say. So bye. Thank you. So yeah, this is the kitchen, and we've prepared, no expense spared, feeding Sheffield sustainably up there on the mirror. And this is the live feed. Do you like it? What a pun. So I'm just going through now to the main studio. Excuse me, Jack. Good lad. And we'll just get the camera there. Hopefully everyone can still see and hear me. So as you can see behind me is the food system map. And oh, hang on. There's someone breaking into the studio. noise, guys.
We want food. Feed the planet.
Come on, okay.
We want sustainable food.
Okay, great. Well, look, let's talk about this at the interval, okay? All right, let's talk more about sustainable food at the interval. It's all about the future, folks. That's what it's about. It's all about the future. And thanks, guys. Right. James, can we have the holding slide, please, for the first session, so I can introduce our speakers for the first session. Fantastic. Okay, so obviously throughout today, we're going to hear from many speakers across Sheffield's food system. And in our first session, I'm very pleased to be introducing, as you can see on the slide there, Professor Duncan Cameron from the Institute for Sustainable Food, Sue Pearson from Healy City Farm, Martin Yarnett talking on food hubs, Debbie Matthews from Manor and Castle Development Trust, and Dr. Alexandra Sexton from the Institute for Sustainable Food. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to chair today's event. It's not an easy task. I'm sure it'll go very smoothly. Before we get started, I do just want to say thank you very, very much to the Opus team for all of their amazing work making the festival happen. And I also want to say a huge thank you to the Institute for Sustainable Food, without whose support events like this would be much harder and much more challenging. So thank you very much to the Institute. And also thank you to everybody who is going to be speaking today. It's your fantastic work and taking time out on a Saturday to share that with everybody that makes the event possible. And also just to say thank you to everybody that's here. There's over 50 people, which on a rainy Saturday is a really, I think, a fantastic achievement. Do stay with us throughout the whole event. We will be chatting on the online during the sessions. I'd love to hear questions on there that we can address later on. We're going to be polling throughout the event. And as mentioned, during the interval as well, we'll be going back into the live feed, seeing what's cooking in the kitchen, and also saying hello to Madam Zucchini and seeing who's joining Madam Zucchini. So yeah, hopefully a bit of fun into a serious topic that is obviously central to all of our lives, because, as the saying goes, we are what we eat. Okay, I think we're ready to start the first presentation, if that's okay. Yes, without further ado, Duncan, are you there? Are you ready for the stage, sir?
I am here, Gareth. What an amazing intro, my goodness.
Well, nothing short of a revolution going on here. And, we need change. So let's see change with our younger generation. Let's see it start there. That's what I think.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, over to you.
I will just share my screen, and I hope. Oh, apparently the host has disabled screen sharing. So our first technical hitch.
Should work now, Duncan.
Okay, brilliant. I'll try again. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my slides now. Is that okay? If someone could just let me know, that'd be wonderful.
Looking good, Dunk. Yeah, looking good.
Thank you. So thank you, Gareth, for inviting me today, and what an amazing event that this is going to be. And I'm really delighted to be here with a number of hats on. I'm from Sheffield. I've lived most of my entire adult life in Sheffield. And I was even more delighted to be asked to be one of the directors of the university's new Institute for Sustainable Food, because sustainable food for everybody has really been a passion for not just my career, but for my life personally as well. And I've had some amazing opportunities to help shape the food system globally, and to think about the kind of things that we need to do to make food sustainable and available and affordable for all. I was incredibly privileged back in 2015 to be invited to speak at the United Nations Climate Summit in Paris, COP21, to talk about the role of food in the climate system and how achieving sustainable food is one of the big wins that will get us towards emissions reductions that will allow us to stay within global boundaries. So I went to Paris and I spoke at length about the perilous state of our agricultural soils, because ultimately pretty much everything that we eat is derived from soil. And I think an amazing quote from a farming group in America that really resonated with me was that we owe our entire existence on this planet to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. So I spoke about the soil and spoke about the soil as an invaluable and non-renewable resource that was capable of helping us mitigate climate change, but also was central to being able to feed our growing population. And this went down quite well with most people, but it did get me my first bit of social media trolling, where I was trolled by Breitbart News and a range of other right-wing press from America, who described me as a peddler of university disaster pornography. I'm not quite sure how one peddles disaster pornography, but if it upsets Breitbart, I'm all for it. But for me, Paris was much more of a learning opportunity. It was a real meeting of minds of people from different backgrounds, different disciplines, to share what we all knew about climate change and work out how we might fix it. One of the things that I find frustrating about these kind of meetings is that we talk about the problem, but where are the solutions? And solutions is what myself and my colleagues at the Institute for Sustainable Food are all about. Now, I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that the food or the environment that we draw our food from is being squeezed from all directions, from nutrient limitation in our soils and the need for extensive use of chemical fertilizers in industrial agriculture, the amount of energy that agriculture consumes an enormous quantity of the global energy budget. And just making nitrogen fertilizer alone, from work we've done at the Institute, we've been able to reveal the phenomenal waste of energy that comes from inappropriate use of fertilizers. We have drought and the changing in our seasons that we really now are seeing bite hard as an impact of global change and impacting the people that have the least resources to deal with it. And finally, from my perspective, the soil. Now, I'm a soil microbiologist. I've spent my career trying to eavesdrop on the conversations that microbes have between one another and plants in the soil, and to work out how we could use those microbes to make food more sustainable. So it maybe doesn't come as a surprise that soil was my real interest here. So what I'm going to do very quickly is take you on a whistle-stop tour from London to Paris. From Sheffield to Paris, we've already done. We're now going to fly over to Oman in the most sustainable way possible, of course, to Jordan, and then we're going to come back to the UK, and we're going to embed some learning about how we might change our food systems for the better to make them more sustainable and more equitable. So coming back from Paris, this kind of squeezed agricultural landscape picture is one that really started to crystallize in my mind. And I wondered, well, what technologies are out there that are deployable and reasonable now that we could possibly bring together to solve this problem? And this was really an idea championed by my very close friend and collaborator, Professor Tony Ryan, who is the director of the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures at the University of Sheffield. So we worked together to try and reimagine how we could solve these problems and whether or not it was practical to deploy those solutions right now and across the globe. And it all really started probably 10 years ago or more, where we'd had a big project funded by the Engineering and Physics Research Council, the Sciences Research Council, which is was all about thinking about how do you make a green roof that you could just slop on top of a building without having to mess around with infrastructure and that was within the limits of those buildings. And that was borne out by a series of planning requirements in Sheffield and other cities at the time. And we invented a technology that used polyurethane foam, so car seats, that was lightweight and could last essentially forever. And once that project had finished, you move on to other things. We hadn't had the chance to really do that much with it until we stumbled across these tubs full of our old mattress foam and planted green roof material that had been left in our outside our greenhouses at the university for years, about 4 or 5 years. No one touched them. And what shocked us was the ecosystem that had developed within this polyurethane foam that we created. So I think we thought we'd found an alternative for soil. And this is nothing new. Hydroponics has been going on since ancient times. But one of the biggest problems with it, and the reason that it isn't as sustainable as you might think, is because of the use of growing media that can take the base of organic materials as well as inorganic materials, but none of which are sustainable. So that's where we thought, right, we're going to square this circle. We're going to build synthetic soils made out of polyurethane foam that are infinitely recyclable, incredibly low impact on the planet, and very cheap to produce. And Dr. Harry Wright, who was then a PhD student with Tony and I, was able to work out exactly how to do that. And these plants are just literally growing in blocks of foam that Harry designed and produced. And this time-lapse video, I think, really shows you what's achievable from essentially a bit of old car mattress. So we found an alternative for soil. And the rest of the technologies are pretty much plug and play. We can become much more efficient at using nutrients, using things like hydroponics. We can develop and apply renewable energy technologies. And we can find a way to make it rain through desalination of seawater, so removing salt from seawater using solar energy. And if you put all of these technologies together, we realized you could build something that we dubbed the microcosm farm. But now came the job of convincing someone that this was possible, that we could build something like this to demonstrate how all these technologies working together could be very, very sustainable. We were lucky enough to be able to go back to the climate conference that was in Marrakesh a year after Paris, which was focused on solutions. My team and Tony's team met with colleagues from across the world, but we very quickly realized that a partnership was forming with a university in the Middle East, in Jordan. It was trying to develop these kind of sustainable food production technologies for a country that is highly reliant on food imports and whose food prices are incredibly volatile as a result of those food importation markets. So a couple of years after that train journey back from Paris and thinking about our microcosm farm, we built it. I say we built it. Jake Nichols, who led the project from Sheffield, and a team from Oman built the microcosm farm. And as you can see, it worked. All of these technologies together mean this facility essentially has a net zero footprint, or very close to net zero. And it uses very small amounts of non-renewable resources, and the kind of plasticware that it's based on will last for a long time. And at the same time as this was happening, Tony, who's in this picture, in this picture, had been spending a lot of time working in the refugee camps associated with the Syrian conflict in Jordan. And he found an old abandoned warehouse that was absolutely jam-packed full of mattresses. So I get the most excited text message I've ever got saying, can you turn these into allotments? So could we make green beds out of old beds? So I said, fetch me some back, which they did. And we spent a bit of time working out how to grow stuff in it. And we succeeded. We were able to produce really impressive crops of tomatoes and other crops that we were able to test and make sure were safe for consumption. And the reason we wanted to do that is because the Zachary refugee camp is one of the most barren places I've ever been. It's like the surface of the moon. And it really doesn't have the colour green. And mentally, the refugees were finding the absence of the colour green really hard, especially since they knew how to grow. But the Jordanian government didn't want this site to become permanent. So to make it non-permanent, they made it illegal for anyone to plant anything in the ground. So having sense checked that this would work, we were really fortunate to be able to work with a Syrian refugee himself who came to Sheffield, Dr. Moed al-Musulmani, who together with the Sheffield team was able to design a training program at the United Nations base camp at Zatari. And these are some pictures of some of our early examples. This is the greenhouse that they built. All of this is out of recycled material. There's nothing new bought here. Things that were found around the camp. And the project took off. We were very fortunate to get about over £200,000 now in crowdfunding to keep this project going. We've already trained over 1,000 refugees, and in the next 3 years, we will have trained 9,000 more. And that means 9,000 families have access to fresh fruit and vegetables that otherwise would be completely unattainable to them. But we learned a lot. We learned a hell of a lot from our experience in Oman and in Jordan. When we came back to Sheffield and working with a large group of stakeholders, it became obvious that actually some of the embedded learning for low-cost hydroponic systems to produce food cheaply that could act as a catalyst for training in the community was something that Sheffield could really benefit from. So through the council and Studio Polpo, we were availed of a site in Tinsley where we created Sheffield's first hydroponic, one of Sheffield's first commercial scale hydroponic gardens. So this is the old school at Tinsley. And the idea was to use very low cost technologies that were easy to put together that meant any meanwhile space like this, and what I mean by meanwhile is that you can use it in the meanwhile while another purpose is found for it, would enable us to build a business model, which we are happily really working on now, that would allow us to produce food in the urban environment sustainably and cheaply. And the government has invested a significant amount of money in this now for Sheffield. So we'll be building a series of demonstrator sites across the city, including with Gareth at Regather, to test out and sense check some of this technology. I'm sorry that was a bit pixelated, but that gives you an idea of the scalable modular systems that Jacob and others were able to design and build. So what's the future of all this technology? Is it really capable of solving these huge global problems? And I really think it is. I have a bit of a problem with the idea that global problems need global solutions, and sure, some of them do. That's absolutely the case. But I think we really undervalue the importance of local innovation and local understanding of food systems associated with particular places. And we often turn our back on the innovation that's happening in those communities and consider it and see it as potentially just a small component of achieving a sustainable food future. And I fundamentally disagree with that. I think local innovation and expansion of local food production can be far more than life enriching. It can form a viable part of our response to the climate crisis by producing low carbon, sustainable and affordable food, and really embodying the values-based food system ideas that Regather and Sheffield have been helping to pioneer. And I'm not going to say much about this paper because I know Jill Edmondson will be talking later, but one of the things we've thought about is, if we took Sheffield as a case study, what technologies could we use in Sheffield in order to make it self-sustainable for the food that it produces? And do we have enough space? And Jill will talk to you about this later, I'm sure, but we do have enough space to produce as much food as we need if we're creative, and particularly if we take in technology. Now, this is a big technological diagram showing the linkages between the different parts of the city in which we could grow food. But I want to focus on here and come back to our idea of growing stuff on top of buildings. And these green roofs could be fundamentally different. With the technologies that we've developed in Sheffield, coupled to new technologies that are coming on market, and critically evaluated by really open and deep partnerships with organisations like Regather to help us sense check the validity of our approach, and also to act as delivery partners to help us solve the problems that will inevitably arise as we start to deploy this technology.
Apologies, Duncan, we're running a little low on time.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm finished.
Thank you.
That's me.
What a great start. Thanks so much, Duncan. And I'm sure this will be a challenge for all of our speakers today. 10 minutes goes so quickly, and with so much amazing work going on within both the Institute and Sheffield as a whole, it's going to be challenging, but I'm sure we can do it. So without any further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Sue Pearson from Healy City Farm to today's event. Sue, over to you.
Thanks, Gareth. It's great to be here, and I can't compete with Kitty and Jack and Greta Iceberg. In fact, I had one backup plan, which was my son has baked a loaf of bread this morning, but he's actually just left the house with it because it wasn't for us, it was for a neighbour. So, but in the spirit of this being a festival of debate, the farm, Healy City Farm, is celebrating its 40th birthday in 2021. So I've got my happy birthday banner up there. So I thought that people would like to see there's a celebration going on there.
Fantastic.
I have got a couple of slides. It's very low tech compared to what you've just been hearing from Duncan. So this is good old fashioned growing stuff in the ground using organic techniques. So I just wanted to use my little slot to talk about community food production and the challenges and how we might scale it up here in Sheffield. So I wanted to just credit Gareth there because the farm is a member of the Chef Food Network, the partnership, and we're also a member of Sheffield Organic Growers. So the photos there just show some of our project sites. I think the next slide shows the same thing. There's no text or anything. It's just pictures of people learning skills and growing stuff. So where do I start? Right. We've got a team of horticultural growers. I call them my local food team because that's what they do. They grow food locally. And we've got 8 key sites across the city of Sheffield and a few smaller sort of pocket sites as well. What we've tried to do is make it about the people and the skills that they learn when they come to one of our gardens. And we're not the only people in Sheffield doing this sort of thing. We're blessed in Sheffield with a network of green spaces, small areas of land, allotments, pocket parks, where local people come together, and there's a social element to it, there's a learning element to it. And importantly, it's a sort of pyramid scheme of cascading the skills of being able to grow food yourself at home to feed your family, which, given that we've gone through the horrors of Brexit, we're still importing far too much fresh fruit and vegetables as a proportion of what we consume. Why can't we grow more for ourselves? So we've been doing the local food programme for 15 years now. We regularly have between 90 and 102 people every week in different courses across the city. We run training courses in organic growing. We do beekeeping courses as well, and I'm sure that cleverer people than me are going to be talking about pollination and the importance of urban beekeeping to keep our crops healthy later on in this session. The outcomes that we deliver are really about the people, improving health and well-being with greater knowledge about healthy eating and diet, growing food at home and on allotments, vulnerable and disadvantaged individuals improving their life skills, and an increase in the number of times per week that they cook food from scratch, cook a meal from scratch using raw ingredients. So it's education, training, it's demonstrating organic methods, and it has been growing. I can report that we had 5 tons of produce in 2011 and 12 in 2019. I don't think we've got figures for 2020, and let's face it, last year 2020 was a bit of a bonkers year for all of us with COVID. Where does the food go? We provide a fair amount for Gareth's Regather box, veggie box scheme. Gareth will know more than me exactly how that works. The volunteers themselves take a lot of produce home, and there's a huge sense of pride and achievement in actually starting from scratch, going through the growing cycle, and then actually harvesting something that you've grown yourself and making use of it. I think it goes way beyond the nutritional value and the pleasure of that. I think it's that feeling you get when you've done something for yourself. In the summer last year, well, with the lockdown, some of our food went to local food banks. It sometimes goes to farmers markets, but we weren't able to have many of those last year. And we have a little community cafe at Healy City Farm, and all the greens, all the salads, all the root veg for the soups and things is grown at the farm. So that's, I like to boast, and I might be wrong to do so, but I think we've got one of the shortest food mile journeys of any cafe in the city anyway. But I'd be happy, very happy to be proved wrong on that, because the more people that are doing this sort of thing, the better. We run cooking and eating classes for people on low incomes. We call it farm to fork. I don't think we coined that phrase, but you get the picture. Go and pick it and then grow it together. I think I might be running out of time, so I think I've been a bit quicker than Duncan, but I echo his concentration, his emphasis on soil health and soil nutrition. My team are very knowledgeable about organic growing methods and want to share their knowledge and their understanding of the natural environment, companion planting, all the ways that you can get more benefit from the land. And in terms of challenges, demand is certainly growing. We get many, many more inquiries for people wanting to come along than we've got capacity for. If I had a vision about how this might work better, it's about joining up with other networks, really. And I know we're going to hear from some other people on the call who are also developing into the world of production, so food production. And I know that we'll also have people talking about the supply side and the distribution side of that, of the food as well. So I'll not bang on anymore, and I'll hand over back to James. Or is it Gareth? It's Gareth.
Hi, Sue. Thank you so much. Before we welcome our next speaker, we have actually got just a minute or two, so do stay on. The 40th birthday for Healy City Farm, what's in store?
Well, we've already done a little campaign, a little fundraising campaign, because we are a charity. We do make some money on the food, but we're not a commercial farm by any stretch of the imagination. We're hoping to have a Harvest Festival celebration event in the autumn, probably early October, hold the date, where we'll do it's a little bit like Ambridge, this is a prizes for the best, largest spud. We'll have Madame Zucchini hopefully to help us do some vegetable entertainment and celebrate both our 40th and a good harvest, I hope.
Fantastic. Well, I know everybody here will be, wishing happy birthday to Healy City Farm, because it goes, I think, it goes without saying, but I think it's worth saying, Healy City Farm is a food and farming institution in Sheffield. And it's great that you've been able to join us today and share just a little bit of all of the amazing work that goes on at the farm. So thanks ever so much, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to welcome our next speaker. Martin Yarnett has developed an expertise in food hubs through research and travel. Martin, are you with us? Are you ready for your presentation?
I am. Good afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in 2007, I was living in a small village in Herefordshire, and I was one of a small group of people who set up a village shop, a cooperatively owned and run village shop. And 5 years later, we got a lot of money from the National Lottery to recreate it with new premises as a local food centre. We doubled the amount of local food we were selling in the shop. And when the pandemic came along, I was no longer living in the village, but when the pandemic came along, that doubled again. So over the years from 2007 to 2021, the turnover of local food in the shop quadrupled. However, what this showed me was that however well we had done in this respect, we were still making very, very small progress in affecting the livelihood of local producers. As we know, local producers and farmers generally receive a tiny amount of the value added in the whole of the food chain. And I began to wonder about what we could do about that. And in 2019, with the help of a travel award from the Winston Churchill Trust, I went to Italy and to the States. And in the States, I traveled from the West Coast, Portland, Oregon, to the East Coast of Philadelphia via Chicago and Charlottesburg to have a look at food hubs. Since around about the 2010, the United States Department of Agriculture has helped set up more than 200 food hubs across the United States. The big job is to aggregate and distribute what I've called good food, good in the sense that it's good for the planet, good for farmers' incomes, and also good for consumers. The business model of the food hubs is primarily, although not exclusively, wholesale. In other words, it's aimed at the catering and hospitality sector. It uses public procurement to boost turnover, and it uses very sophisticated IT systems for tracking the provenance and deliveries in the system and to pay payments and invoices. I went to have a look at one of the brand new food hubs in Portland, Oregon, the Red on Salmon Street. It had opened only a few weeks before I arrived. It consisted of more or less 20,000 square feet of repurposed warehouse, which had cost $20 million to set up, and which now provides a base of more than 120 food businesses of all kinds. So it brings together and distributes produce from small and medium-sized farmers all over the region. And it also supports them technically to enhance their output sustainably all year round. So it supplies schools and hospitals, canteens, restaurants, and also a regional supermarket with food. And it has, interestingly, a big focus on Black and people of colour as producers and consumers. And it specialises in working with schools to produce school meals in disadvantaged areas. So if you go to the Red, what you'll see is a gigantic warehouse with lots of storage fridges and freezers, training kitchens, with space for food outlets, cafes and restaurants, and you might be there when there's a wedding taking place. So this helped to create for me a kind of a vision And that vision I've set out at the top of the slide. I've said in every neighbourhood, we expect a health centre and a children's centre. We should also expect a food centre, a local food hub that caters for everyone's needs, regardless of means, as well as providing a food insurance safety net for people who are struggling to feed themselves and their children. And that's my main conclusion from a quick review of food trends in the UK and the US. Moving on to the next slide, if maybe I could do it. Here we go. One of the other things I've done the last couple of years is really to look around at what's happening with the food scene, particularly in the UK. There's been an enormous explosion of creativity, of new systems. I mean, for example, in the last year or so, more than 500 new fruit and vegetable box schemes have been started up across the UK. So there's a lot going on. But the surprising and in some ways frustrating thing about this is that we're generating all kinds of different models, but often there isn't very much connection between the models or people thinking about where their model stands in relation to other things. So I think I've been able to identify 5 particular kind of things which people refer to as food hubs, including, beginning with Regather in Sheffield, a retail aggregation and distribution hub. So it uses produce from its own and multiple sources, including abroad, including Spain, to distribute around the city. Other food hubs add to that a number of social facilities, including community centres, cafes, training courses and so on. And then there's the other kind of food hub, which doesn't actually produce very much food except in its own community garden, but which focuses on all the social functions of food, including a local food market, training courses in food preparation and service, and so on. So you get the idea. There are a number of different kinds of models of food hubs. And what strikes me is that if only we could find some way of combining the strengths of these different models, what we would be able to do is to tackle 3 of the bugbears of the alternative food scene. That's to say, the lack of scale, the fragmentation, and also the reputation, often misplaced, for being unaffordable food. So thinking about what kind of development principles we would want to apply to food hubs of that kind, it struck me that if we're going to learn from the lessons of the States, we want to have the broadest customer base. We want it to be retail and wholesale, boosted by public procurement, to produce scale and a viable business model. That means there has to be serious investment, and I don't see why the City Council and the Mayor of South Yorkshire and also local investment funds shouldn't be tapped to produce a serious investment fund for local food hubs. It should combine selling and the social functions in one space. It should bring people together. And above all, what it should do is to begin to overcome one of the biggest problems of our food system, which is the segregation of people who can't afford food, the people who are cash poor, from the people who can shop wherever they like. And we're beginning to see all over the country a campaign, a commitment to the right to food. And one of the ways of dealing with that commitment, we can see in Scotland, in Moray, where the council has devoted money to provide direct support to people who are cash poor so that they can shop wherever they want to. Sheffield, I think, has a number of local assets that we can draw on. To begin with, we have really a new city council, which is beginning to look again at ways of the different political parties working together. And that should provide a new base for a relaunched food partnership in the city. We need to work on a principle which I think we'll hear a lot about today, and which is the view that the people know better, not necessarily best, but they know better, and that we should be trying to develop a bottom-up food culture which takes into account the views of the people who use it. We should be repurposing public assets to create new warehouses and local centres for food. But above all, we have this big challenge. We have to find ways of linking food banks and food box users. And there are ways of doing that, providing we can bring them together in the same places, in the same organisations. We can cross-fertilise ideas and we can support people who need food banks. Finally, let's see, as Duncan has said, to what extent we can drive up localised production of food. In a blog I wrote for the Farming and Countryside Commission a while ago, I suggested ways in which we could begin to overcome our dependence on food imports. It's absolutely crazy that we import apples. It's crazy that we import onions. These are all products that we should be able to support easily from within our own systems. So that in a nutshell is the idea. Food hubs in every town or city, local food centres in every neighbourhood. This isn't a blueprint, it's simply one possible model for running a cooperatively owned and run system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I hope everyone can see just how quickly discussions around food system challenges can become very expansive and sophisticated. But we need concepts like food hubs to kind of penetrate and cut through all of that. So thank you very much, Martin. I hope everyone on today's event is maybe feeling a little bit like there's a pace emerging. We have so many speakers. It's important at this point just to help focus our minds on the clear emergencies that we are facing within the food system, and you know, particularly within Sheffield, around the challenge of food access, food security, and the precarity of accessing healthy, healthy and affordable food for everyone in the city. You know, we've heard from the Institute about ways of increasing localized food production. We've heard from Healy City Farm emphasising, you know, soil-based growing, again, localized food production, and from Martin, understanding ways in which we can connect together different parts of the food system. And it's at this point I'm very pleased to welcome Debbie Matthews from Manor and Castle Development Trust to the event, because this, I feel, is where we start to you know, move around a different set of food system challenges. And I think there is very few people better positioned than Debbie to help us understand some of those challenges. So Debbie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you for the invite. A little bit anxious of being sandwiched between such academic ability. I work for Manor and Castle Development Trust, which is based in one of the more disadvantaged neighbourhoods in Sheffield, and I've worked there for the last 25 years now. I was involved in setting up the S2 food bank after we were challenged by a colleague who was working at the S6 food bank. They were delivering more emergency food parcels to S2 than they were to S6, and we were challenged about what we were going to do about that. I'm also involved in the Healthy Holidays scheme. It used to be called Holiday Hunger, and we changed that in Sheffield to Healthy Holidays because of the stigmatisation that goes across identifying people who literally can't afford to feed the children. Just be under absolutely no illusion that food is a real political issue, and the S2 Food Poverty Network its expressed aim is to actually close down the food bank. We live in one of the most richest countries still in the world, and we have got people who are literally going hungry because they don't have enough money to live on. People literally going without food and having to make choices between whether they switch their electric on or whether they buy food, and it's just not acceptable. Some of the people that we work with find themselves in crisis, and that's what the food bank offers. It offers crisis emergency parcels, but it also offers support to address those underlying issues. And we've just moved into a partnership with the CAB, which actually starts next week, where we've got a CAB worker who will be working alongside the food bank volunteers and staff to make sure that those issues that have created the problem in the first place are addressed. So the biggest issue we find is that people find themselves in debt. The living on benefits is not easy. You are not able to build up a safety net of savings. You've got no assets to borrow against, and you only need your washing machine to break down, or your children need new shoes to actually throw you into a crisis. We've also seen an increase in people who are actually working, arriving at the food bank for support because they literally don't have enough money to live on. 0-hour contracts are another reason why people end up at the food banks. Domestic violence, we've had people who are self-employed and people who've got health conditions and find themselves in crisis. So the benefit system is no longer a safety net for people. And I think it's quite interesting that as part of the pandemic, the universal credit, there was an additional £20 given to people, and that will come to an end at some point. But the irony is, if it's okay for some people who just find themselves in trouble because of a pandemic, are awarded that additional £20, why can't people who are needing that support also get that £20 long term? So I think there's a real issue around the narrative around people who find themselves in difficulty that we need to challenge. The policies of national government and the way that the media portrays people as benefit dependent and not worthy really frustrates me. And we've had these conversations before with Opus and other colleagues around how we challenge that narrative. Essentially, poverty is structural. Capitalism requires a proportion of the population to be insecure because that's the way that they keep wages down. It's how they keep people nervous and anxious about their futures. And the concept of class has become toxic. So the way that we talk about class has changed, and working class people are now associated with poverty and has been a drain on society rather as making contributions. And I think we need to be challenging that. I think the other two things that have that impact as well is the way that people view taxation. People resent paying their taxes for public services, and public services are seen as a necessary evil, not as part of the support system for people across the board. So food poverty, we've got a model which is about aiming to close down the food bank, but we can't see an end to that at the moment. Austerity and the pandemic have just made things even worse for people. But we have a food bank system, so people get 4 weeks of food without question, and then we start to work with them on the underlying problem. And once they get through the initial crisis, we've got another offer, which is the food club, where they can pay a membership of £2.50 and get £20 worth of food. So we're subsidising people's shopping, but we're not actually giving them all of their needs. And we're starting to move people towards independence, because that's what we should be doing. We should not have a layer of society who are dependent on charitable handouts, food parcels or subsidised food. There is an issue around affordable food and access to affordable food, which is a real challenge. for a lot of our communities. We have got a couple of well-priced supermarkets, but actually accessing those requires 2 bus rides for some people, and they can't afford the transport costs because they're already financially hard pressed. So there are some real structural challenges around food poverty and accessing food. We work very closely with FareShare. We have linked up with FoodWorks, because I think one of the real challenges to get beyond food poverty is around linking up the waste food agenda with the food poverty agenda. Both of those things ought not to exist, but they do. And it's partly to do with the fact that we have been driven into this consumerist cul-de-sac, where consumerism, I think, is dominating some of the policy and the political decisions that are made. I personally would like to see reform around the tax system. I'd like to see the housing reformed. We've got real challenges around affordable housing, where private sector housing, private sector rented accommodation are charging above the housing benefit cap, which means that people have got to, in order to get housed, have to pay that difference between the housing cost and what they can actually claim in housing benefit, and that is creating debt for people that they can't afford. And I think we need to review our welfare system and look at other alternatives. So one of the things that I'm really interested in, and again I've been talking to other colleagues around, is the universal basic income, because it solves the problem, but it helps start to change the narrative around people who do need some support in order to survive. So essentially, the food poverty agenda for me is essentially a political issue with a small p, and listening to some of the comments that people have been making around linking up some of the systems, I think all those systems joining together and actually having a shared narrative could really make a difference in Sheffield.
Thank you very much, Debbie. What a fantastic statement to make at the end of your presentation there. I couldn't agree more. This is what events like today's are all about. So thank you very much for bringing the issue of food poverty to the forefront of our minds. And the key thing there for me resonated the most was just that clear statement about structural challenges. Immediately going well beyond just the simple step. I say simple, but the simple step of feeding people, but then into how it is we address much more deeply entrenched issues, economic poverty, class, health inequalities, huge challenges. And thank you very much for bringing those into today's session, Debbie. Thank you very much. So the last presentation of this first part of today's Feeding Sheffield Sustainably event, very pleased to welcome Dr. Alexandra Sexton, and I'm really interested. I'm a bit of a tech geek, and what a great way just to wrap up this first session. Dr. Sexton, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and it's really great to be here, and all such fantastic talks so far on so much important work that's going on in Sheffield. So just really brilliant session to be rounding off. I'm going to do the token pause now as I try and share my screen. So hopefully you can see that. Great, so I'll get straight into it. So I'm Dr. Alex Sexton, and I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellow at Sheffield University. And I'm a social scientist by background, and I'm going to be talking today about the research that I do on a new and emerging food technology that's come on the scene in recent years. So you might have heard of it by different names. Some people call it cultured meat, which is what I'll be using today. Others refer to it as cultivated meat or clean meat. Franken meat has been a sort of less flattering name for it in the media, but essentially what the technology involves is using stem cell technologies to grow meat outside of the animal body. So one of the methods involved is depicted here at the bottom of this first slide. The first step is to take a small biopsy of cells from a living animal. You then place those cells in a growth medium and put that into a bioreactor where they will multiply and grow and start to form bigger muscle fibers. And then the idea is you can collect up those muscle fibers to make your final product. So to date, it's been possible to make kind of minced meat like products. The kind of end goal really for the industry is to produce bigger cuts of meat, such as steaks and things like that. So I don't have time really to go more into the specifics of the process, but please do put questions in the chat if you have them. But what I'm going to talk through today is really what this technology could offer a place like Sheffield in terms of providing this city, or really any city, an alternative way of sustainably producing animal meat or generally animal proteins. So there are lots of promises of why this process is seen as better for the planet, better for animals, and better for us in terms of health as eaters, compared with conventional animal agriculture. And one of the main promises is that it will likely use a lot less land, and also will be much more flexible in terms of where the facilities will need to be located. So this could mean that a lot of land could be freed up from agriculture for things like rewilding or ecotourism. And it could also mean that facilities could be placed just outside of cities, or even potentially in them. So I've got a very futuristic image here from a cultured meat venture in Japan of how they've kind of imagined what this future and what the facilities could potentially look like. But what will they look like inside? Well, some in the cultured meat industry often draw parallels with beer brewing and say that future factories will effectively be like meat breweries. So I'm not sure what you all sort of think about that, but for some people, thinking of it like this in terms of brewing is a bit less yucky because we're familiar with this process and already kind of accept it as part of our food production. Another possibility could be that there'll be mini production sites inside restaurants. So this is a test kitchen in Israel. So you can sort of see through from where you're sitting, having your meal, you can see through into the back there through the glass, sort of knowing exactly where your meat is coming from. So it kind of plays with this idea of the sort of greater transparency and I guess greater connection and very short food miles from getting them just across the room there. And then another possible future could be that we have our own meat growing appliances in our home. So this is a speculative design project by Alice Turner, who's a student at Central St. Martin's, and she created what she calls the carnery. So this idea that you would have an appliance that would sit alongside your coffee machine and your microwave at home, and you would order your cells using your smartphone, possibly ordering them from local farms or farms in the area. So that doesn't actually exist. That's just a sort of speculative idea. But these are all really just imagined ways of, how we might experience cultured meat in a place like Sheffield or other cities, other parts of the world, and could potentially contribute to sort of feeding urban areas with high volumes of sustainable protein. However, there are still a lot of question marks about how sustainable this technology will be and sort of some of the broader social and economic implications it might bring. So, for example, it might create more urban-based food jobs, but without support for training and reskilling, it's unlikely that current farmers and food producers could easily switch to this approach with the expertise that the technology currently requires, which is mostly sort of cell science and engineering at the moment. So there's important kind of rural versus urban livelihood implications to think about here. The energy footprint of the process is predicted to be very high. So the whole industry needs to be based really on renewable energy to be able to deliver on its environmental promises. So this is a pretty big obstacle for the industry to figure out as things, and particularly as things stand with the energy sector at the moment. The potential to free up lots of land from agriculture could be a huge win environmentally, but again has livelihood implications for agriculture and will need really strong policy protections to make sure that the land isn't changed to something more damaging. Like with any new technology, there are questions about affordability, particularly in the short term, so it probably will be quite expensive as the sort of first products come to market. But also it will be likely very expensive to sort of get involved with as a producer as well, particularly as the technology stands. So that could sort of be a barrier to smaller scale producers. There's also a big question mark as to whether cultured meat will actually replace conventional meat products, or will it simply be another item on the menu and on the sort of supermarket shelf. And we're already seeing with plant-based products that places like Burger King, for example, aren't really seeing people switch from conventional meat burgers to their new plant-based ones, but rather it's just more vegans and vegetarians are actually coming in to their stores. So it's not replacement, it's just additional stuff being produced, which we can't really afford to do for the future of sustainability and sort of tackling what's actually the problem with the food system. And a lot of this technology is already wrapped up in intellectual property, which again poses another barrier for smaller scale ventures to get involved, and could also ultimately lead to further concentration of power and ownership in the global food system. And I think that was something that Martin raised earlier in his presentation. So just to expand on this point with the final slide, bit of a migraine on a slide, but this is a sort of institutional map of what the broader alternative protein sector looked like back in 2020. It is changing literally on a weekly basis, so there's probably out of date bits here, but just to give you a sense of the breakdown of the sector, you've got the kind of startup companies at the top, the institutions supporting the development of those startups, and then at the bottom you've got different kinds of stakeholders funding these ventures. And I just want to sort of draw your attention to the bottom right where it says corporate partners. And this also includes plant-based as well as cultured meat companies. But down at the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see some of the biggest names in food and drink globally. And it's these companies that have been investing a lot over recent years in both plant-based and cultured meat technologies. And so while some see this as a good thing, because if you get the big players on board, then you're more likely to shift the dial quicker and potentially replace the most intensive systems of animal agriculture around the world, which could have major benefits for the planet, public health, reducing antibiotic usage, etc. But it does also raise important questions about whether big industry buying up these technologies will actually lead to the radical change that we need for the food system. So again, picking up on themes that have already been discussed. And I'll just put this final image up here. This is a depiction of how power is currently distributed within the food system. And with the pinch point in the middle is a handful of multinational companies, like the ones that are investing in cultured meat. And they're controlling the flow between producers at the top of the hourglass and us as customers and eaters at the bottom. And there's been lots of research over decades that has shown how this unequal balance has underpinned many of the major ecological, social, and health crises of the modern food system. So this is something that we really need to think about in terms of who is best placed to drive cultured meat innovation, and whether we actually need to be rethinking the broader system and not just kind of reinventing and tinkering with the end product. So again, linking to the kind of big societal questions, particularly about whether cultured meat can be innovated in different ways that fit maybe a more local or agroecological model, for example, or if we actually want cultured meat at all, because this approach doesn't really tackle the culture of overconsumption that we kind of have. So should we instead be trying to get people to produce and eat less meat overall, try and shift our food cultures to whole plant-based foods like lentils and beans and things, or more vegetables. This obviously comes with its own implications and trade-offs, so those need thinking through as well. So in a nutshell, really, food technologies like cultured meat might have a role to play in feeding cities and other places like Sheffield, but there are still a lot of questions and uncertainties that need thinking through, and we need to make sure that if it does end up playing a role, it doesn't just reinforce all of the problems that we currently face with food and farming today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So a lot more than just technology going on there. Some fantastic insights and commentary, again, on structural challenges and the nature of the global food industry. Reminded me of the music industry in a previous sort of career, I suppose. But yeah, the dominance of a very small number of players entirely skewing, the structure and the ability for the sector to operate in a fair and equitable way. Okay, so we've come to the end of the first session. So we're going to have a break, but before we do, we're going to do some polls. I think the guys in the studio are ready with those. Fantastic. So there's a series of questions here, which very simple questions, just to kind of test the water. And so do have a look at the polls. I think we'll collect the responses ready to at the beginning of the second session. Is that all right, James? Should we do that? Just
Yep.
Great stuff. Okay, so we'll leave those polls up throughout the break. Yeah, I think I'm going to hang around in the studio, and I'm also going to be over to the live feed in the kitchen, and I'll probably be saying hello to Madam Zucchini as well. So if you don't want to leave the screen, stay and enjoy the fun. So yeah, thanks very much.
What do we want? Sustainable food. When do we want it now? What do we want? Sustainable food. When do we want it now? What do we want? Sustainable food. When do we want it now?
Fantastic. Okay, let's go and see what's happening in the kitchen. Well done, you two. There'll be a direct action before the end of the day, I think. So we'll be back after the break. What time, James?
20 past 2.
20 past 2?
Oh, 25 past 2, sorry.
25 past 2. Okay, so just 5 minutes. So I'm going to head over to the kitchen and let's see what amazing stuff has been happening here. Madam Zucchini, you really must see what's going on here. Look at this creation. Oh, amazing.
Also, I made this with no help at all. There is this small park, yeah, and it's got a bench. It's got 2 benches. This tree that you can actually take off, and it has a human on it.
Amazing.
Wow.
Look at this. Are you getting this, Madam Zucchini?
I am. I'm having to do the peering middle-agedly. So, oh, wow, look at it.
And there's pepper eyes with blueberries. There's lots of hair made of pepper and carrots.
Yeah.
Our nose is made out of a carrot stick, some bits of pepper, and 2 blueberries that are underneath a bit of pepper. And then we've got 2 pieces of watermelon for the mouth.
Yeah.
And we've got big lettuce leaves for the skin.
That's some spring green cabbage there, I can see.
It's amazing.
Isn't it? Wonderful. Wow.
Also,
We're definitely going to get our 5 a day.
Also, we made our own hummus.
Your own hummus?
Yeah. But the only problem is we don't have any garlic.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
talking of which, do you know, I've got a garlic character here, and bearing in mind that there was protest earlier and he loves a bit of confrontation, I've got, wait for it, drum roll, Michael Clove.
Oh, hello, Michael. Oh, how
Yes.
lovely of you to join us today.
Yes, hello. And I just wanted to say that I shall be taking all your comments to the Prime Minister. I'm not sure that I really have his ear these days, but perhaps we can catch up with Boris himself later. And please don't use all my head for your salad. It's already been a bit, look.
Oh dear,
Michael Clove's brain's been scooped out, which we all knew possibly had happened.
Fantastic. Well, I think there's probably nothing better to do with Michael Gove's brain than eat it, to be honest. Oh, controversial.
Controversial, yeah.
Indeed. Very good. So let's have a spin around the camera here. So we've got some dips. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know about you folks, but hopefully you can take a break before we start the proceedings. And Natalie, I mean, what an amazing set of sessions, eh?
Who's Natalie, Gareth?
Sorry, Madam Zucchini. I do
Yeah,
apologise.
yes. Well, amazing. I was just kind of Greta, to be honest. Greta has got a bit of a crush on Duncan Cameron now. She was getting quite excited about the green roofs and the hydroponics. It was so wonderful to hear about Sue and it's very pleasing to hear that I'll be helping them celebrate in the autumn for their anniversary. Again, Martin with the food hubs, the local food centres, very, very exciting. And again, it was Debbie actually that prompted with her very, very, very absolutely correct to say that food is a political issue. That's why Michael pricked his ears up there to come along. Also,
Absolutely.
I'm interested in the whole sort of. I'm kind of wondering where I stand in terms of this cultured meat thing, but I am thinking that Frankenmeat could be a very worthy opponent for Leek Skywalker.
Hello, Leek. It's so good of you to join us as well.
Yes, the only edible Jedi, as someone called him recently. So yeah, he's thinking about how he could perhaps see off Frankenmeat or have some sort of cooperation. I need to work out the thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, will it involve creating a character out of a raw steak, or will you actually go the whole way and have a piece of cultured meat? I think
this is it, isn't it? I mean, I have in the past done a sort of a Halloween show with Frankenvegetable and Draculeek. So I'm kind of now, honestly, this has sent my mind racing. You know, the sheer amount of input, positive, exciting. Yeah, and vegetables are definitely in there, aren't they, Gareth?
they have to be. Absolutely, they do indeed. They do indeed. I felt that the range of topics covered in the first session was absolutely remarkable, and did leave me in a bit of a spin. It's like moving around, from hearing from the Institute to the farm to food hubs, to serious issues around food access and food security, and then just fast forward to the future with cultured meat. Really all over the place. But that's kind of how the food system is, isn't it?
Yes. And I guess that's it's the exciting thing about, I mean, there are loads of serious things to be addressing right now, but it's the exciting thing about the world, and the more we find out about the ways of tackling these solutions. I guess the tricky thing, as always, isn't it, is to get everyone talking together and working out ways forward and not being blocked by unnecessary nonsense. The audience can make their own mind at what I might mean by unnecessary nonsense. I mean, it is really hard to make these things happen. I know, I guess, as people refer to the food partnership, that's kind of what we're about, isn't it? Trying to work this stuff through. But yeah, massive challenges for all of us, which is why we need to enjoy our food in the meantime and really celebrate all the brilliant people in Sheffield who are doing this amazing stuff.
I'm going to take my lead from Debbie. Her statement at the end of the session there about finding ways to work in partnership, and working together to tackle these challenges, because I think one of the main, if you like, realities, we have to accept is that there is no one organisation that can deal with any of these major issues. And, the food system and the challenges around the food system, they connect with poverty, they connect with the climate emergency, they connect with, health inequalities, which in our city are, the matter of literally decades between one end of the city and the other.
That's right.
Is food the answer?
Do you know, I often think it is. I would say a bit of play thrown in there as well, a bit of, joy and love and generally enjoying each other's company and celebration, as well as, because we need all that to deal with some of the horrors that are going on. But I do think, given that someone said earlier, we are what we eat. So therefore, it kind of is really. And if again, the economy was based around producing decent food and all the green issues, I'm not being very articulate here, but people will catch the drift. There's loads more people on the call who could be far more articulate than me. But I think you're right, Gareth. I think it might well be. It's got to be
part of the solution. And I feel like this is where, we're going to see some change. Now, just before we go back to the studio, can I just say a massive thanks to the live feed here in the Roberts household. And, the first course, well and truly underway. No vegetables were harmed in the making of this feast. And they will all be eaten. Nothing will go to waste. Even the little scraps will be fed to the chickens. Hey, Michael, Clove, off you, I won't swear, but do one, will you?
Michael might be a bit harmed in the making of this thing.
Get him in the mincer, quick. Right, I think it's about time to begin. Thank you, Madam Zucchini. Lovely to hang out with you in the interval. Thank you so much.
Catch you later, Gareth. Bye.
Hurrah. Fantastic. Okay, so this is going smoothly, he says confidently. Session 2. Here we are. Back in the studio. I've had a little nibble to eat and really looking forward to welcoming our speakers to the event. Coming up, we have Douglas Kemp from Regather. We have Fran Housel, Chef Food, Sam Evans from Essex Food Bank, Shakila Sharif from Voluntary Action Sheffield, and Hamish Cunningham from the University of Sheffield. And I can see the polls. Do we have some results on the polls? Yes, we do. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm just looking at this for the first time. So how about I introduce our first speaker and we look at these in between the next 2 speakers. Is that a good idea, James, or should we look at these now?
Yeah, that sounds good, Gareth. Let's go. Yeah.
Look at these now.
I would suggest, sorry, let's look at them. Let's look at them now. Yeah, let's do that quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Doug, we'll be with you shortly. Okay. Thanks a lot. So, this is just to kind of provoke some discussion here. So we've got a clear disagree on terms such as seasonal, organic, local, or plant-based do more harm than good. So there's a strong disagree on there. We've got a strong don't know about terms such as local, seasonal, organic, or plant-based should be more expensive to use and more strictly regulated by the government. So there's a strong don't know in the middle there. That's interesting. We've got an agree, strong agree to terms such as organic, local, plant-based, or seasonal. Help me to identify and share positive values I associate with sustainability. So what we've got there is a very clear association, a positive association with some value-based terms there around food. So that's good to get some feedback there. And then moving on, we've got 3 questions around schools and food. we've got a 70% strongly agree that all school children should have regular access to facilities to grow their own fruit and vegetables and cook their own meals. We've also got a good, yet nearly unanimous strongly agree that all schools should teach and assess the abilities of children to grow their own fruit and vegetables and cook their own meals. And a similar set of results again for all school meals should be made using a minimum proportion of locally produced ingredients. So again, pretty much unanimous there on the strongly agree and agree. Yeah, a clear sense there that schools are an essential part of the food infrastructure and how it is we might tackle some of the food system challenges that we face. All right, thank you very much, everybody, for coming back on those polls. There will be another couple of sets of questions in the next break. So, Doug, thanks very much for waiting there whilst we looked at those polls. Some interesting stuff there, I should imagine. But over to you, Douglas Kemp from Regather.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doug Kemp. I work for Regather. There's a nice slide just popped up there. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the Regather farm really, and how that links in with Regather's sort of value-driven work. And yeah, just give you basically some sort of description and stories from what we get up to at the Regather farm, and how that fits in to what we're doing. So yeah, a bit of context. It's a 15-acre field that we rent. It's in the Moss Valley, just south of Sheffield, and at the moment we grow vegetables which we supply to the Regather box scheme. It's just a little note to some of the previous talks I listened in on briefly. Some of these sort of the new tech models for growing food, I think I've heard termed as the land sparing argument, where you're leaving land to be sort of to go wild, to be rewilded and producing food elsewhere. Whereas what we're doing with Regather at the moment is very much the land sharing side of that coin, and it's a traditional growing food in the soil outside kind of operation. So the field was an intensive arable field owned by the farmer who is still our neighbour. Field was purchased by our landlords several years ago, and we've been renting it from them since 2019. So this is our second year with vegetable growers on this bit of land. The Regather values that we sort of hold out and tell people about are terms that I guess we've already heard about today: local, seasonal, organic, and we always like to add in cooperative as well, because Regather's organised as a cooperative. We do everything cooperatively within our organisation, and we like to work very cooperatively with lots of other organisations, whether that's being part of Sheffield or working with our other local growers and other sort of actors in the food system in Sheffield. So I'll just go through the values quickly and how they relate to what we're doing at the Regather farm. Local, it's pretty straightforward. All the produce stays local. We sell it all to our own veg box, which is a 15-minute drive from the farm, and then that food is distributed throughout Sheffield by our veg box delivery team. That's the crux of it, really. It's very simple. I've been thinking a little bit more about this recently, because there's two sort of big areas of the vegetable growing where we're not so local, and it'd be great to get that changed. So it's something I'm thinking about for the future, but not something we're able to tackle right now. And that is the inputs which come from further afield, primarily compost. So, the fertility for growing the veg comes from compost that we buy in from elsewhere, and also seed. We source our seeds from companies based in the UK, but it comes from all over the place, including further afield in parts of Europe. That was all very evidently to the fore this winter with Brexit, etc., causing issues with seed supply. So yeah, having a more localized seed supply and compost supply would be great, because they're important parts of producing vegetables. So yeah, something for the future there. Next one, seasonal. Okay, so it's kind of by default, really. We everything we grow has a really heavily seasonal aspect to it, mainly because we don't grow with extra heat or light at the field, and we don't have any significant cold chain storage either. So yeah, we grow it, it's ready at the right season for outdoor vegetable production. It goes to regather in the veg box. You know, it couldn't be simpler than that, really. Growing the right varieties of vegetables at the right time in the right place with the right seed can help you get the most out of your season. Okay, so the main focus on the farm really is about the value organic, and organic is a legal term in some respects, and for us, we engage with it as a legal term through our certification of the site, which is carried out by the Soil Association. So we have to stick to organic principles and follow the standards that are set out in the legislation, you know, typically not using pesticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers or other contentious inputs. And we have to have very strict record keeping about what comes on and off the farm, whether that's compost or seeds or what we harvest, etc. And that gets us our organic license, and we get to say we're an organic certified business. However, the word organic could also have another implication in that it's a way of thinking about things more holistically, a whole sort of system approach, very ecologically minded, and that does underpin the organic standards that people like the Soil Association, you know, use. But you know, there is a broader sort of value driven you know, interpretation of the term, and that's really key to what we do at the field. So we're making all our decisions like with a really big ecological sort of conditions attached to them. You know, like, is what we're doing going to harm or benefit the ecology of the field? And we do that all the time. And we don't always get it quite right. Actually, there's definitely loads of things we could improve on, but that is sort of a crux to what we're doing. You know, essentially we're respecting and making space for all organisms, plants, insects, tiny soil protozoa, mammals, birds, etc. And that's fundamental to what we're doing on the land, and ultimately it's going to help us to produce food as well. The diversity of species brings like resilience to what we're doing, and it's more important than ever when we have changing weather that's responding to changing climate. So one of the key things we're trying to do is restore the soil to be more biologically active. I obviously mentioned earlier that it was an intensive arable field when we took over. So the soil basically, we need to sort of drag it back into good health, I suppose. So we've been using soil tests to, you know, see what we need to do to improve that, and then making the the relevant amendments, which is basically lots of compost and some other mineral additions at the moment. So that should bring the soil back into health. And then there's all those soil organisms which are sort of driving the whole ecological system on the farm. One of the crucial things about soil health that we're doing at the field is making sure that we've always got, as much as possible, living roots in the soil. So plants everywhere, not bare soil if we can help it. That just keeps the system in place. It doesn't really get washed away or damaged by particularly winter weather. So at the field we'd sow cover crops, which is typically a ryegrass and a vetch, which is a member of the pea family. We'd sow those crops into any bare soil we have after harvest in the summer, and that means that the field's covered over winter and it's got living roots in the soil, helping to keep the soil biologically active. Another key thing we've done since we've been renting the land is we planted 1 kilometre of hedgerows around and across the field. We've got a diverse mix of native British species, predominantly hazel and hawthorn, but lots of others in there as well. Some of these hedges are mulched with wood chip and protected with tree guards so they don't get damaged by pests. But there's other areas which I haven't done any of that intervention. I've just left it to see what happens with nature, sort of taking over, and we might lose some of those plants, but it'll be really interesting to see what the sort of nature and ecological response to that planting is, and you know what benefits.
Just coming up on time.
Sorry, say again.
Just say you're coming up on time.
Okay, thanks. So the other thing then is we've seen a lot of all these things that we're doing at the field has seen us have an increase in lots of mammals and large birds, really. And hares, deers, badgers, foxes, rabbits, pheasants, and they're all regular visitors to the field, and what they're doing is they're indicating that we've got an interesting ecology and the animals want to live there, and they're sort of indicators that we're doing the right thing. My particular favourite, actually, which is an anecdote I often mention, is whenever I'm cutting the grass, I have a kestrel, and it's not my kestrel, obviously, but it comes and it follows me around, and it's because I'm basically exposing the small mammals, voles, shrews and things like that, and it likes to feed on them. And we always have this, I feel like there's almost like a bond between me and this bird of prey as it's feeding when I'm doing my work there, and it's sort of indicative of us getting on the right path for having a good, strong ecology at the field, which is what we're trying to do, really. Okay, I'll wrap up there with the story of the kestrel. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. I'm pleased you managed to share the kestrel story, because I think that's a perfect example of that relationship with nature that all organic growing is trying to sustain. Thanks ever so much. Okay, so without further ado, because we are a little bit behind time, too much chat at the interval, I think, but that's my fault, is Fran Housel, talking on behalf of Chef Food. Are you with us, Fran?
I am indeed, yes.
Fantastic. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Can I just ask James to make it possible for me to share my screen, please?
No problem.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, hang on one second while hopefully everyone can see this. In fact, what I'm going to do is, because my slides go off to the right hand side, I'm just going to minimize me, because nobody really needs to see me talking. It's all good. So I'm here to talk about scaling up low carbon food infrastructure in Sheffield. So low carbon, synonymous with the word agroecology, organic, sustainable. There's various different ways of describing this, but we've recently produced a paper with Chef Food, which I co-wrote with Gareth, on the subject of low carbon food infrastructure in Sheffield. If you're interested in reading it, then we can make sure you get a link later. So just a quick shout out to say some of the good work that Chef Food's actually been involved in. We've just submitted a Sustainable Food Places Bronze Award submission, which means it will hopefully, fingers crossed we're going to get this. We've had some good noises so far, and that recognises the good work that's been done in the city already around sustainable food production. And we're also a member of 2 national programmes, which I won't go into detail about now, but I urge you to have a look at what those programmes are delivering. So that's the Urban Agriculture Consortium and the Fringe Farming Project, and Sheffield is involved in both of them, which is quite a coup for the city. So a great time to be talking about scaling up food production. So what is the value of urban agriculture for Sheffield? Well, if we look at it on a more regional basis, across the entirety of South Yorkshire, if we exclude the very 2 largest farms, because they're not at all representative of the scale of production in the region, then there's actually 99 acres of agroecological production. You can call that nature-friendly farming if that suits you better. These 99 acres represent a turnover of £8 million, employing 100 staff and 2,000 volunteers. Interestingly enough, more than 50% of this production is actually taking place in community gardens. So you've heard from Healy City Farm already, they've got their satellite sites, so that represents quite a lot of that area. Typically, community gardens are around about an acre or less. And community gardens are set up for a variety of reasons, and high yield of food or high yield of crops is not necessarily the main motivation. It might be that they have more of a focus on well-being, or maybe even offering horticultural therapy. There's all sorts of different styles, different purposes that meet community needs. But interestingly, there is a production technique which we call spin farming, or small plot intensive farming, which is shows that a very small patch of land can actually be incredibly productive. So it relies on lots of human energy and resourceful cropping strategies. So using the same bed multiple times a year to produce maybe 3 crops if you're particularly productive, possibly even more if you're really good at it. And this means that you've got the most efficient use of land possible. So if you compare that to a rural situation where perhaps land isn't quite so, there is more land to work with, there's no urgency to make that land quite as productive in this sense. So it's not to be confused with intensive farming that you might see across Britain. It's small plot intensive farming. And it's this level of agriculture which is quite interesting from an urban point of view. Now, it's not to say that rural farming or farming on the edges of the city isn't relevant, because it really is. But if we think of this from a trying to change the food system in a really visible way, then if we have neighbourhood level market gardens, that brings food to where the majority of people live. And it has to be done on small plots, because those are the only sites that are available in an urban situation, because obviously land is in high demand. So it's really important, if we want to actually make some substantial structural change to how we value food and how importantly we value the people that produce food, then food has to have a role on a neighbourhood level. I think it's the fact that food happens elsewhere. So either it happens in what we tend to call the countryside, or it happens on, in another country entirely, that we don't really have this relationship with it. This is one of the reasons that so many people lack the basic skills to feed themselves, because we've been, obviously, as a wealthy country, we've managed to export that problem elsewhere. So what would happen if we actually made attempts to expand local agroecological production? Well, first and foremost, it would represent an easy boost to the circular economy of the city and also the region. And of course, if we reduce our imports, we're going to increase food security. But it's also important, we're not just gaining food security by having fewer imports, we're also taking back responsibility for production. Because again, if you export your food production to the other parts of the globe, you might be talking about areas where there's very little water available, or they're having to clear native forest in order to make room for food. This is not an acceptable situation anymore. So we have to think of, even though we're talking about developing food production locally, we have to think of it in this global context. And of course, food that's produced along nature-friendly or agroecological principles will have a lower carbon footprint. And also, if you manage the soil in a sustainable way, you actually lock carbon into the soil instead of releasing it, because the soil is no longer eroding and you are using cover crops and other things, as Doug suggested in the previous discussion. So if we take neighbourhood gardens or neighbourhood level community gardens as an example, how are we going to equip these sites with the skilled growers that they require? So this is a really important question to actually dwell on, because the median age of farmers in this country is actually 60 years old. So when they retire, so presumably within the next 10 years, who's going to feed us then? Because it's not necessarily their children, because they're not going into farming. So we've got two issues combined here. It's a case of, this is a huge opportunity for that land that's currently managed probably largely on a non-organic basis to actually be brought into agroecological production. However, if farmers aren't passing on skills to their children, and we're not highlighting the issue of the lack of skills to turn the vision into reality, then what are we going to do? Where are these growers going to come from? So by thinking about existing community gardens as more like an incubator, this could be a place where people with an amateur interest in growing actually become apprentices. You could consider them potentially as a recruitment ground for further education. This could be in a more formal sense by doing national qualifications through colleges, or it could be working alongside professional growers, a kind of farmer-to-farmer apprenticeship or mentorship model. So if we follow that path, we've got a ready recruitment ground. And one of the reasons I feel this is quite an advantageous way to actually approach the issue is because community gardens are a very inclusive environment. So I've been involved in a couple. I run the Foodworks farm, and I can assure you that anybody can come, regardless of their current skill level, learn something each time, and also have a good supportive experience, because very nice people generally get involved in growing. So it provides this supportive setting of growing, which most people won't have, because if you're trying to grow your own veg at home, and you don't know why it's going wrong, as is often the case, then you get disillusioned and you might not do it again. So it's all about bringing people in so that they can experience the, if you like, the joy of growing your own food and getting it to its first harvest and picking it. That is such a powerful thing to do. And of course, while this is happening, you're empowering people with employable skills. And this is so important because we have created a mythology in this country that says that farm workers are actually unskilled labourers, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And particularly when you're talking about an agroecological approach where you have to pay attention to the ecosystem, you've got to know about soils, you've got to kind of micromanage your vegetables because you are thinking about them, protecting them in a much more you have to find lots of different solutions because you're not using herbicides and you're not using pesticides. So you have to have quite a level of education in order to be able to do this. So if we can put neighbourhood level gardens as a strategy to actually allow the city to have a different experience of food, then hopefully we will start attracting various people into these sites, and that will start to change our relationship with food. Now, it has to be said, is that time coming? Yeah, okay. Not everyone has the opportunity to volunteer. So this is a really important part at the moment because I recognise that not everyone's in a position to offer their time for free. So I think it's really important to have a joined up approach to this, where we can say that those hours that are given should be recognised towards existing unemployment schemes. We perhaps should be offering students opportunities and giving them credits for the work that they do, or a similar kind of system like time banking for people who just generally come in, and those the hours spent working for your community, growing food for your neighbour, can be translated into some other useful asset for you. And if we manage to arrange all this, okay, no problem. Yeah, it's all about culture change. That's the only thing I wanted to say, Gareth. If we can just get to the point where we can do all these things, then we'll change our culture. Okay, thank you.
Amazing. Again, what a fantastic way to wrap up a session there. It's all about culture change. Moving swiftly on, trying to keep to time here. Next up, Sam Evans from S6 Food Bank. Sam, are you ready and waiting?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'll try and be brief. So hello, everyone. My name's Sam Evans. I'm part of the leadership team at S6 Food Bank. We're going to talk a little bit today, I guess, about how we became a citywide food bank hub during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, you know, we didn't set out with a vision to become a citywide food bank hub. We just kind of set out with an objective to really make sure that no one in the city went hungry. But obviously, when we started, we only had 4 sites and they were principally serving West Sheffield, but the demand was so great during, you know, particularly this time last year, that it became evident that we'd have to scale up. And so we began to launch new sites, and indeed other independent or smaller food banks began to notice the benefits of being part of a kind of a hub network and joined us. And so to give a kind of sense of the scale of our activities today, we're feeding about 2,000 people every week. Sadly, over a third of those are children. We're doing that from 10 sites, and they no longer just cover West Sheffield, they're citywide, so we've got stuff in most parts of the city. We're doing that from a 5,000 square foot warehouse in the city centre, and we've got onward logistics provided on a voluntary basis from a local company. And so, you know, I guess the success of this, for want of a better way of putting it, is that through the pandemic, even when the shelves were stripped out, when there was buying limitations in the shops, when all those challenges were in place, we've never stocked out of food. So everybody that's come to us at every location has always been fed, and we've worked closely with partners to do that. But that's been the success of the model. But I want to talk a little bit about the strengths and the challenges and the opportunities of it in a bit more detail. So one of the real, I suppose all of the strengths come from that scale. And so one of those strengths is that of resilience. So there's always been local demand fluctuations at food banks. It's hard to know what you're going to deal with on any given week. And so previously, certain food banks, and you know, I can think of some of the independent food banks who we worked with that had this, would end up kind of stripped out during a session, so they wouldn't be able to provide any food. But as I said earlier, we haven't had that problem because we've got the network between these 10 sites, because we can see the kind of demand across the city, we've been able to prevent that kind of that stocking out, making sure that everyone always receives food. The other thing is that because we've now got a relatively large staff and volunteer team, over around 200 volunteers, there's some depth there as far as resilience. So when people have been self-isolating, during the snow last February, when people couldn't come, when there are those changes, we're able to continue to stand people into those roles. So we've been able to build that resilience there. And the other thing, it comes back to that larger team, and that's to do with being able to deal with crises and challenges. And so whatever the crises is that faces beneficiaries, whether that be kind of a change in universal credit thinking a couple of years ago, or floods, many years before that, or in this case, the pandemic, that there's kind of multiple challenges to face at the same time. In this case, it was to do with kind of PPE, health and safety, and who to keep safe, particularly procurement and logistics, and all of those challenges all at once, getting hold of buildings. But because there was that kind of depth in the team, you were able to divide them up and concentrate, deal with those challenges individually, and manage to scale. So there's some of the kind of resilience benefits of the hub model. But the other benefit I guess I wanted to talk to was about aggregated supply chains. And I've kind of nodded to that earlier, but we've talked about demand surges. But the other thing is kind of the chronic demand challenges that are being met. And so, there are certain bits of the city that I suppose have most of the demand, but don't necessarily have most of the supply. But because we've been able to spread out across Sheffield, we've seen maybe some of the communities, such in the Sheffield Hallam constituency, being able to provide for the communities where there's more demand, where there's more need, and offer that equity where there wasn't equity between food banks before. And with that, because of the scale, we're now able to forecast, the demand going forward. So we're able to overlook kind of the blips and bumps. We've got that data much more quickly, which allows us to kind of manage that scale and those challenges, but also allows us to look at how we do our buying. So because we are now having to buy food because of the scale, but we're able to buy that food in much larger scale. So we buy it in whole lorries now. We're able to palletize it and kind of reduce a lot of the work that's associated with that buying. And that's obviously cheaper, but it's also more green. There's less travel going on. And we've also been able to lean into some of the regional surpluses, which we couldn't deal with before because of just the scale of them. So to give an example of that, we worked with Sheffield City Council last year, and we received 130,000 bars of soap, but we were able to handle that, palletize that, and move that out because of the scale of the network. So there's some of the strengths, but I guess the other thing to look at is some of the opportunities. And so one of the opportunities is to be able to really leverage the expertise, whether that be the operational expertise so far as kind of procurement and buying and supply chains, to make sure that we're effective and efficient in handing that food out. But also there's a real benefit so far as support services. So obviously we want to work up the chain as much as we can to try and address some of the root causes or the causes of food bank usage, to try and address some of that. And so there's two things that we're doing particularly, and they're around debt advice and benefit support. And so what we did is we set up a phone line so that people could call in from across the city when they needed food, so we could talk to them, provide some of that additional support, try and break down some of the barriers that people face when they access a food bank. But that's meant that we're able to provide debt advice kind of citywide, and indeed we've seen tens of people over the last year become debt free. But as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully as we begin to unlock and can see beneficiaries face to face again, and as now we've got these kind of 10 satellite partner sites, I guess there's an opportunity for us to spread some of that learning out, to spread those teams out and those skills out, and to offer debt advice in the communities, and to offer support into each and every one of those communities, and to begin to try and work with other partner agencies to increase that. So I think that's a real opportunity for us to address some of the root causes of poverty, as well as as well as meeting the needs that are faced. I think one of the other opportunities that's beginning to grow is that of regional collaboration. So, where previously there have been surpluses in food banks in North Yorkshire or in over in Cheshire, but it hadn't necessarily made sense for anyone to collect them. We're now in a position to do that. We've been receiving food from food banks, within a 50-mile radius, and I think that potentially allows us to reduce food wastage across a regional level, as well as trying to look again to some of that buying and trying to reduce the buying costs again. But so I've talked to kind of strengths and opportunities, but I think challenges are also really present in this. So obviously just running at that scale is a challenge, and although it's a strength, that is where the challenges are present. So this year we're almost certainly going to hand out more than 1 million meals, and so it's very likely that well, it's not very likely, but plausibly that could become £1 million if we didn't manage to get the donations of food in, if we didn't manage to control procurement and do some of those things really in a careful way. So I guess the challenge is, how do we create networks and partnerships that share the responsibility as well as share the benefits? And obviously that's about partnership work. Partnership work is the answer to that. But how do we make sure that as we do those partnerships with local partners and with other agencies, we actually build upon infrastructure, we don't replace it? How do we make sure that the local ownership stays in place? So I think as we integrate supply chains, and as we integrate those systems more and more, that becomes more of a challenge for us to walk through. But that's probably the challenge as we go forward, is about making sure that we build upon infrastructure rather than replace it.
Thank you very much, Sam. Some really interesting comments appearing in the chat thread there, responding to some of the points you're making about scaling up. So amazing work. And thank you very much for giving us just a quick insight into that today, Sam. Thank you very much. I think moving on to the next speaker, Shakila Sharif from Voluntary Action Sheffield. I think this is going to hopefully connect in ways that we're starting to see some narratives emerging. So Shakila, are you here with us, ready to present?
I am. Can you hear me okay there, Gareth?
Fantastic. Lovely to see you. And over to you.
Right, okay. Well, my presentation is called Story to Tell. My name is Shakila Sharif and I'm the Food Coordinator at Voluntary Action Sheffield. I am glad to be here today. I don't actually normally work Saturdays, but when I agreed to come here, I thought it was kind of getting a free meal or something, because it was a Feeding Sheffield event and a festival of debate. But, well, here we go. Zoom, here I am. But then I remembered there's no such thing as a free lunch. So my sweet and sour presentation is about food and poverty. What do I do at VAS, and what would I like to see? So what I'd like to do is tell you a little story. Let's start with the 4 W's. Now, for the academics, can't even say that word. For the academics amongst you, I've seen there's a few of you here today. You'll know what I mean. The why, the what, the where, and the when. But don't worry if along the way this all turns into a plate of mash. Maybe I'll leave that for another day. So in 1954, Mr. Maslow talked about the basic human needs. He was right on. He really was, when he said we need affordable food, decent housing, and health and well-being. So get your teeth around that. We're still talking about it. Affordable, healthy, nutritional, meat, veggie, halal, gluten-free, or other dietary requirements, and not forgetting culturally appropriate and accessible too. And that's just the food. Hard nut to crack. Now, our friends at the food banks, who I get on really well with, by the way, in Sheffield, they had a big ask in 2020 when the big C hit. They did what they could, and at one point in the pandemic, increase was well over 80%. They did provide VAS with lots of data, and the increase was massive, but they're still here to tell you the tale. So is it really food, glorious food? Why do we talk about food poverty? Do we mean just poverty, or are we making a meal out of nothing? Food banks, they provide a parcel of food following DAB, maybe a doctor or your midwife too. So when the pandemic hit, there was no pasta, beans and flour around. Oh, and not forgetting the loo rolls. And that's when this job, my job, came about. But somebody else was doing that before me. I've only been doing it for 6 months. Now that the paper, the flour and the pasta is back on the shelves, the agency to share the numbers and data isn't quite here, although I'm still working on it. I'm trying to get more. But let's not sugarcoat the problem. We do know that food hunger. So one of the issues that came to light in the pandemic was the BME food bank users that we'd not really seen before. The pop-up BME food banks almost overnight, including halal one, came into sight. The issue was that many of the food banks are in churches. So what do you do when you don't go to a church? I had heard that what if you don't eat canned beans and would prefer dal, and that's lentils for those of you that don't know. Well, but we do need halal food banks, I think, or should we just have food banks that are providing mainstream food, like our mainstream services? But that's a conversation for another day. That's mainstream services. So hang on a second. Do we need more banks? Or is it about inclusivity and working together and needing extra bank notes? Food banks, community shops, food projects, growing food, CAB advice, debt support, homelessness, domestic abuse and addictions too, not forgetting independent food aid network too, are all the kind of places that I work with. Let's not forget the campaigning that we do. In VAS, we talk about it all, the need for more money, better health and well-being, and a big shout out for all the hubs that we run to. Council Food Poverty Working Group and Collaboration Plan, and maybe a food strategy too. We're talking about that, aren't we, Gareth? And we're all going in the right direction. Oh, and not forgetting the work at the council too, and that's with Colin. Somehow, all these ingredients sit in my job. Mixing up the mixture and joining up the dots is what I do. The Volcom sector is a channel to the real communities and the real world. Food cuts across all the communities and not just the Sheffield postcode boundaries. Regardless of race, colour, shape, size, religion, origin, we all need to eat. For some, a curry is their Friday treat, but it's about educating and making choices and healthy lifestyles too. Last but not least, have you heard of HAF? Holiday. Now in Sheffield this summer, for kids that are getting free school meals, there will be a great summer experience on holiday activities, fun and play and a meal. How is that for a deal? At VAS, I'll be supporting that too, and that's working with the council as well, and many of you that are already here. So now I have done my what, why and when, let's quickly think of the how. Now, I do think all this kind of needs. We do really have to nurture and nourish our partnerships to make them really wholesome, good value for money, a bit like a decent buy one, get one free. And maybe even at some point, we can all sit down and have a real cup of tea. At VAS, I promote voluntary action. I try to engage with those that aren't easy to engage with. About communities, do I care? Information and intelligence is what I like to share. I do have a hunch you ain't getting a free lunch, but I shall leave you with some food for thought, for the food knowledge that you have sought. Because you know, food really does make the work go round. So let's all work together so no person has to go hungry, but most of all, we really do not want to live in poverty. Thank you, and that was my story that I wanted to tell you. I hope you liked it.
I certainly did, Shakira. There was poetry, and I lost count of the food references. You were weaving so many beautiful food references in there. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, see you, Mo.
Yes, you will indeed. You will. Okay, so Hamish, are you with us? I think you are. I can see you. So we're going to introduce Hamish to the proceedings. Hamish Cunningham from the University of Sheffield. I think you need to share your screen as well.
I do indeed. Can you hear me, Gareth?
I can, yeah. Over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, disembodied human beings. I hope you're getting a screen share. And hello. Yeah, God, how I've learnt to dislike talking to these things in bedrooms of one description or another. But hope on the bright side, what I'm talking about today is somewhere that I hope I can invite you to in the not too distant future. I read a really interesting book recently called 90% of Everything. And that's roughly, apparently, the volume of what we consume in this country. 90% of it is delivered on these things. This recently became a symbol of the vulnerability of our supply chains. This is the boat that was stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal recently. Maybe probably most of you recognize it. Fewer of you may realize that actually there was an instance of this kind of catastrophe closer to home. This was the Yorkshire version of it. Fred Slaithwaite, captain of the vessel, said, "1 minute we were fine, and then a gust of wind caught us." And they were expecting to lose as much as £3.45 a day until they managed to clear that out. That was the main pork pie route to Yorkshire was catastrophically blocked for, I think it was more than 10 minutes at the time. Joking aside, I think many of us can probably agree that the food system is broken, and it's not just the transportation side of it, which is really rather pathological. One of the most profound pathological events in recent times, of course, is the pandemonium, and right back at the start of that, Duncan, who opened our conference today, and Peter, his co-director, pointed the finger at the food system for the pandemic and for the zoonotic transfer of diseases from animals, which has been the source of most of the recent new communicable diseases that we've seen over the past 5-10 years or so. We're conventionally taught that markets create efficient solutions, but they don't, of course. What they create is profitable solutions. And when our global markets are controlled by a small number of huge organizations, all of whom are in competition, the logic of the system basically makes everything else secondary. If you've seen the film The Corporation or read Joel Bachan's lovely book, this will be very clear to you. So what all this means is we need more food like this. I was so excited when I grew my first cucumber that my first aquaponic cucumber. I took a picture of it. Food that's local, sustainable, not at the end of long, vulnerable and polluting supply chains. So how do we do that? If we're looking for techniques, technological solutions that work in lots of different little areas, and that's what we need after all, given that most of our current agricultural land is already being farmed. Most of our food production is part of the broken system that I've just been talking about. The go-to technique is hydroponics, which a number of people have referred to. Hydroponics is growing plants in dissolved fertilizers. It doesn't require soil space. You can do it 24/7 if you put the energy in for the lighting and so on. It's a highly productive technology. If you go into Tesco's or the Co-op, buy a lettuce or tomatoes, then quite often they've been grown at places like Thanet Earth, which is the pictures on the right there, a huge hydroponic facility in the south of England. So far, so good. The main problem with hydroponics is that the fertilizers aren't so sustainable. Fertilizers, either a natural resource like potash, which we have to dig out of the ground, it's running out, or it's created by very expensive energy intensive processes like the Haber-Bosch nitrogen fixation process. What we're working on with Regather at the Institute for Sustainable Food at the university is aquaponics. The aquaponics is very like hydroponics, but we replace the fertilizer with fish. So we have a closed loop water circulation system. There's a picture of a system designed by the UN's FAO down there. And what we have in that system is fish and plants living in symbiosis with a mystery third organism, which is bacteria, nitrifying bacteria. The fish, we feed them, the fish metabolize the food, they produce ammonia as waste. I often say that my mission is to save the world with fish poo. If you have an ammonia-rich environment sitting around with nothing eating that ammonia, then naturally occurring bacteria, that's our third organism, will colonize that environment. And that's what happens when we start up an aquaponic system. The bacteria translate the ammonia, the fish waste, to nitrates, and then nitrates and nitrates, and that's plant food. So the plants happily consume the nitrates, they clean the water, the clean water goes back to the fish. It's very minimal from the point of view of water use. Hydroponics, you get chemical buildups that you sometimes have to flush, and you can't use pesticides. You can't use growth hormones because the ecosystem that you have, you can't use these things that are good for one part of it without damaging another part. So it's necessarily a kind of bioorganic process. We can't call it really organic because organic certification is done by the Soil Association in the UK. We're not using soil, but it is very clean food. And the input, by far the largest input to the system is the fish food. And that's potentially at least very sustainable. It's not always sustainable the way it's done now, but it is potentially very sustainable. It can be generated from food waste, for example, via insects. What's the catch? It's complex. It's a bit more complex, a bit more costly than hydroponics, and therefore our profit-based system isn't very keen on it. What we're working towards is making that cheaper using the wisdom of crowds, using some technology to automate and to help knowledge sharing, and so on and so forth. And we're doing it using recycled and easily available materials to make it cheaper, and everything is open hardware, open source software. We've had a number of systems in Sheffield. We started half a dozen years ago in the Winter Gardens. We had one on campus. Lovely to have one at Healy City Farm. Lovely to see the talk about the farm earlier on. And I second Gareth's positive comments about the position of that in Sheffield. It's really an essential resource for our community. Gripple, the Sheffield manufacturer, were kind enough to allow us to build an aquaponic green wall in one of their factories. And Duncan referred to a project at the start, which was modelling dry environments in the university. 2021, we will finally, I hope, several years late, open this, which is our new club garden mini farm. And what we're hoping to do is show right slap bang in the middle of Sheffield city centre the potential of this technology as an urban farming contribution to community resilience and Sheffield food supply. Here's another paper that Duncan referred to earlier on. I think my colleague Jill's going to talk about it later on. We could actually potentially grow quite a lot of food in Sheffield. Jill built a model of the city, the green spaces, the grain spaces, and it turns out that the available area, we're not going to use all of that area immediately, of course, but the available area equates to more than 4 times the current per capita footprint of commercial horticulture. So there's a potential there, and I hope it's something that we can take up in Sheffield.
Apologies.
Come to visit us. We'll be running from the autumn. Hopefully we'll have something like the Little Sheffield Feast, which is a historic feast in Sheffield in the autumn, and you can come and see us in September. Here's a link to the slides if you want to find out more. It's tinyurl.com Fest Debate 2021. And thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Hamish. And thank you for bringing us in to the second break. Pretty much bang on time with a bit of adjustment there. Super duper. Okay, so what an amazing set of speakers and some really great chat. Hamish, there's a few questions in the chat for you to pick up on there. Clearly a lot of interest in the ponics there. So please go and have a check out of the chat. Okay, so time for a break. We've got some polls. Joe, do you want to roll the poll? There we go, fantastic. So the polls will stay open during the break. And I'm going to go and nip back over to the kitchen. I can see Madam Zucchini is ready and waiting to say hello. Let's start with saying hello to Madam Zucchini. Who's with you now? Has anyone else joined you?
Yes, I haven't managed to get hold of Boris yet, but again, all the content, all the stuff that's being discussed about, I was particularly excited to hear about those hedgerows being planted from Douglas. But no, we've got no less than Hugh Fennell-Whittingstall.
Oh, hello, Hugh.
Yes, yes.
I was hoping Hugh Fennell-Whittingstall would make an appearance. He's a favourite of mine, I've got to say.
Yes, and so many areas, you know, he kind of is concerned about, really. The eating, the growing, the sustainability. He'll jump on any bandwagon. No, I didn't mean that. No. Yeah, Hugh's great, and he's those piercing eyes. And actually, yes, I met him once, and he seemed to quite like his Fennell counterpart. But how's it going in the kitchen anyway?
Well, good question. The kitchen is smelling amazing. So this is the feast that has been prepared. This is food for the Roberts family for at least the next 5 days. This will be lunches and all sorts. So what have we got here? What's on the table?
So we've got raised cheese. We've got a sauce that I made made of Worcestershire sauce, tomato sauce, and brown sugar. We've got some chilies that Mum forgot to pop, so Mum stabbed one. After opening the oven, it exploded in her face.
Oh my goodness! Exploding chilies.
There's
Fantastic.
chili, guacamole, homemade hummus, bread from Perfectionery, and Jack's Woodlands that we've already seen.
The woodland montage made from vegetables. Amazing.
So we've also got this fellow here.
What did he say? Is he very angry, Butternut?
Yeah. He's fairly grumpy. I'm not entirely sure why. He's a bit quiet. He doesn't tend to share his feelings a lot, but judging by the look on his face, maybe we ought to eat him.
Sensitive.
Oh, he's very sensitive. Oh, lovely.
Oh, I see. Beautifully drawn on.
So I think Did we use some of the vegetables from the first course in the veg chili?
So
Good.
This is all that's left.
Good food reuse going on here. So a lot of the vegetables that we saw in the first interval are now in the veg chili. Fantastic. And I think
I
the
am
bread.
so jogging over to Mearsbrook. I am so over there, down the hill from Walkley.
You'd be very welcome. You'd be very welcome. I did post a picture of our front door on Twitter earlier, but it's our back door actually. But I don't know if that helps you navigate your way here. But
just give us your exact address, and then you'll be in all kinds of trouble, won't you?
Yes. I'd love nothing more to invite the 40 odd people that are on this call over for food, and
I know.
once
Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah, it would be lovely. There once was a day when that would have definitely happened.
I know. Imagine, just think about those times when we've actually all got together on allotments and in community gardens and things. But soon.
Let's hope so. Okay, so the live feed is well underway. I'm not going to put my beautiful family through the rigmarole of being videoed whilst eating.
No,
because that's not fair on anyone, is it?
Chomping is not a good look. I know that from having not many cheekbones. Chomping on screen isn't. No. Very
good. So I'm going to just nip back in here to the main studio. Oh, it's been a roller coaster ride through all of the sessions so far. All our speakers have done a phenomenal job, and I would like to say thank you and sorry for our speakers who may have got cut short a little bit. That's one of those things, but
it is. But also, I mean, when there is such a lot of stuff going on, we all need a tiny moment, don't we? And there's us rabbiting through their quiet time. What they've done, Gareth, is they just shut us off, so they get some peace and stand outside near their rainy doorways for a moment, I would imagine.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
We could just be talking to ourselves, Madam Zucchini, but
I do that a lot. I suppose I talk to vegetables mostly. I've been having a little chat with just because I think he's cute. I'm currently working on a new show, Climate Change, with Greta Iceberg and the Vegetable Avengers, just in case. It's going to be premiered at the school's climate change conference online soon, early July. But anyway, here we have Spider-Man.
Whoa! Spider-Man.
I'm currently a bit in love with him, so he and I have got a great big thing going on. But we've been listening to all the stuff that was there. I would just a few things I was picking up on when Fran was talking about having more vegetables and more community gardens and all that kind of all those thoughts. But then she said you have to micromanage your vegetables, so that got me particularly interested. I mean, I was aware that obviously a lot of us will know about the Incredible Edible movement led by Pam Warhurst, and I kind of wonder whether sometimes we could be doing more to draw that activity together, to be getting more vegetable guerrilla gardening in various places. That'd be great for more of that to be going on, wouldn't it?
It certainly would, absolutely.
I mean, in terms of food puns, with Shaquila, we got more than you could shake a leek at.
I started trying to count.
I know.
And then I lost count because it was so rich in food metaphors and food sayings and and poetry as well. Yeah.
She's a revelation. And also it was great that she got in there about the whole idea about culturally appropriate food. I think that's the first time we've had that kind of dimension mentioned. Whole area to explore there to make sure everything's sustainable for everybody. Brilliant stuff. Do we need to have we're having the poll results. Are we doing that now?
Yeah, the polls are in. And let's see how our attendees have responded to our questions briefly. We're on time and we have got a bit of time to do this. Only fruit and vegetables grown in soil can be healthy, nutritious and environmentally sustainable. we have 53% disagree and another 15 strongly disagree. So that's an interesting one. That suggests that healthy food can be grown outside of soil. Dun, dun, dun.
It does suggest that.
Only a meat-free, plant-based diet can be healthy, nutritious, and environmentally sustainable. And we have again, 55% and another 5% on disagree, strongly disagree.
Mm-hmm.
So a mixed, balanced diet is what our attendees are suggesting there. Energy, transport, and housing should take priority over food and farming when tackling the climate emergency. I kind of thought this might be the answer from our audience today, but it's reassuring nonetheless that we've got a very strong disagree and strongly disagree. There's a serious point there in the question, which I'm sure everyone recognises. Currently, energy, transport, and housing are the dominant agendas when it comes to tackling the climate emergency. And again, food doesn't get a look in. And one of the key issues is about, counting the carbon emissions relating to our food system. And so I think there's a really big opportunity that our local authority and our combined authorities at a regional level really ought to be looking at as to how they understand what our food system actually contributes in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And right now, they don't seem to be taking that opportunity, Madam Zucchini.
No, indeed not. And I think Greta, to be honest, I want to now scour Greta's kind of what she says and how much she refers to food and the kind of issues you're talking about, Gareth. But she's certainly behind you in terms of getting Sheffield to be perhaps a little bit sharper on this one.
I think so. Now we're going to keep on time. So we're going to come back to the polls later on. And I'm very pleased to welcome everybody to the third session. Thanks, Madam Zucchini. See you later. And welcome Emmett Baddeley from Food Hall, Jill Edmonton from the University of Sheffield, Renee from Foodworks, Colin from Sheffield City Council, and Ursula from Madeira. Over to you, Emmett.
Hello, thanks Gareth, and thanks everyone, and especially to Opus for inviting us along today. My name's Emma, my pronouns are they, them, and I am part of the Food Hall community. I work as one of the volunteer coordinators. And what I really would like to do is to be doing this talk at Food Hall and invite you all down to come and have a look around. But I can't do that. But the closest thing I can do right now is to share with you a little video that was made before the pandemic. So this is kind of representative of what Food Hall was like in a previous life. But hopefully this will show you a little bit more about what we do.
Food is the way that cultures interact with each other beyond language. When someone comes into Food Hall, they experience a patchwork quilt of almost 100 different cultures.
The aim of the project is to bring everyone together, so it's creating a public space where anyone, regardless of who they are or what they have, can come and share together.
This breaks down the barrier between taking the service and using the service, so they encourage people to join in, like do some washing up, get to chat to everybody, just create a community really.
I think the most rewarding part of volunteering at Food Hall is just the genuine human connection that you get to feel. I feel most like myself, or like at least closest to who I want to be when I'm here.
It's one of the few things that allows people to come together but also share culture and meaning with each other. You're sharing something beyond food just by sharing food.
Great, I hope that worked for everyone. It's a bit difficult talking into the void. But yeah, so that's a little bit of, to give you more the feeling, I suppose, of what the Food Hall project is and what we do. So as a bit more background, we were set up in 2015 by just a group of people who wanted to do something differently. And they wanted to build a space around the values of the commons, equity and mutual aid as a way to tackle three things: food insecurity, food waste and social isolation. And that is what Food Hall grew out of. We operate on a basis that, you know, we're not a charitable, what we do is not charity. We're not sort of a one-way relationship. We don't have transactional relationships. There's as little of a barrier between people who come in to use Food Hall and people who are sort of delivering the service. Like, we try not to use the term service user at all. And what we have instead is a community. And we have a community where, along the principle of mutual aid, everyone has something to give to other people. Equity, people are treated equally and treated in relationship to their individual needs. And the commons, in that everybody has equal access to our shared resources as a community. And so the sort of core aspect of what we do is around food provision, and we cook hot meals to serve out to people based on food donations that we get in that would otherwise go to waste. So they've been donated by supermarkets and local food retailers and all sorts of places. But as well as our core work, we also try to provide a DIY space for the community to create whatever it is they want. So we have all sorts of different branch projects that go on, from a TV dinner club in normal times, a big art scene, so we do pottery, radio, art, theatre performances, exhibitions. There's a fermentation branch, Social Pickle, who sell things like kimchi and other fermented things that again are all made out of food that would otherwise go to waste. And we're also working on a food delivery project to sort of take what we're doing and what we're producing out into communities a little bit more. And at the minute, we're in the process of moving buildings, and hopefully our new building is going to give us the space to expand and grow a little bit, and maybe set up our own food growing as well. So there's a lot of people on this call who I think I need to have conversations with about that. And yeah, then as part of Food Hall, and from the people who founded Food Hall originally, grew the National Food Service campaign, which is two things really. It is at its heart a campaign to establish a centrally funded and delivered food provision service based around the provision of community-led dining spaces in every neighbourhood in the country, in order to tackle food insecurity, food waste and social isolation. But as well as that, as well as the campaign aspects of the National Food Service, it also acts as a network between similar groups to Food Hall, so things around the country that already existed that were operating along the same sorts of principles, but also new projects that have grown out of the National Food Service itself and with the networks and connections that are provided, and the support provided by that network. So there's branches in Bristol, Cardiff, Glasgow, Nottingham, all over the country. I think there's about 20, 25 branches now. Yeah, so that's the background really. And I've also been asked to speak about the sort of challenges that we face. But I thought to prefix that, I wanted to talk about one thing that I think is not a challenge and is not something we find difficult, which is to gather the enthusiasm, the energy and the time of individual people who are willing to contribute to the work that we do. Because, as I'll mention in a second, funding and resources are one of our big challenges. But in terms of people's time, we're so rich and there's such an enthusiasm to contribute to the work that we do. And because we operate on a contribute what you can basis, and we're never asking people for monetary donations for what we do, that's one way they can contribute if they want to, but people are always willing to contribute their time and energy and skills to the project. We get so many offers of people from all different kinds of backgrounds and professions with all sorts of skills who are offering to help us with what we do, and it's just amazing and really, really encouraging to see that kind of thing going on in our community. But yeah, to come back to some of the things that we do find challenging, as I said, funding and resources are quite a big one, especially at the minute. In normal circumstances, we would be getting some income from hiring out our space for events and things like that, which at the minute over the last year we've not been able to do. But as well as that, we have grant funding and individual sort of crowdsourced donations, which is the way that many projects like us operate, but it's not necessarily the most financially secure position to be in. And yeah, that's just a daily challenge. You know, I'd absolutely love for my job not to always be sort of prefixed with, will there be enough money to do this? But that is just the way that we operate in this system. And the other big challenge that I thought about was in terms of our ability to reach the people that actually need us. And this is sort of expressed in the fact that the community that we have around Food Hall is not really representative of the community of Sheffield as a whole. It's very white, and in terms of the sort of volunteer base that we have, it's mostly sort of young white university graduates. And in terms of the people that we work with, again, overwhelmingly white. And yeah, I think that sort of reflects the fact that we're not necessarily doing the best job at reaching out into a more diverse range of communities. I think partly because we rely on people being able to come to us rather than us going to them. Yeah, there's a few different things there. And then the third challenge I was thinking about is something I think maybe Martin mentioned it earlier on this afternoon, about this sort of hypocrisy and relying on food waste as a way to tackle food waste. In that, you know, what we do is great and we use up food that would otherwise be wasted and go into the bin. But actually, what we do almost legitimizes that system, and it puts us in a bit of a hypocritical position, in which we're legitimizing that system and sustaining it, really. And so it's not a very secure position for us to be in, relying on food waste, when actually what we want is for there to be much less food waste. And I think there needs to be work done to sort of tackle the underlying systems and to change the way that our food is provided. Just to finish off, I want to talk about sort of how what we do fits into the work going on more widely across the city, and looking into the future, like what that can help us to achieve. We already have amazing relationships with various different partners, other actors in the Sheffield food system, many of whom are represented here today. So we have people who donate food to us, such as Beanies and Osmonds and Foodworks, you know, various sort of different independent local businesses and food providers. We have worked with both the University of and Hallam in terms of research about what we do. We have collaborations with other sort of community hubs like Shipshape, the Ben Centre, Buzz, who we've sort of been working with in our food delivery project over the last 12 months. And so, yeah, really the sort of long-term vision is to build on these relationships to create a holistic food provision in the city that takes into account every individual's different needs. You know, all of the people in the city, all of us as individuals here today, everyone around us, the people I can see driving past in the street, you know, we all have different needs, and we're all reliant on different ways to provide our food, but also to provide our social provision as well. And all the services and organisations that we have in the city can cater to those different needs in different ways. And so it's sort of building communication and networks between us in order to adequately signpost and refer people to the right sort of organisations that are going to be able to work with them. And I think a really important part of that is to embody the relationships between our organisations that we want to see between the individual people in our city. So yeah, sort of embodying these mutual non-transactional relationships in order to break down the sort of barriers that we find ourselves in within the sort of capitalist system that we live in. And in this way, we can provide for all of the residents of Sheffield, and hopefully act as an example to the rest of the country, and get this going in other towns and cities across the UK, and again through these sort of networks like the National Food Service Network, expand this across the country. And you know, then it's only one step to full world's domination, where everyone is fed and happy and fully resourced, hopefully. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along today. It's been a real privilege to speak, and I'll pass you back over to Gareth.
Emmett, thank you for bringing Food Hall to us today in a really fantastic way. Raising some of the key questions that Food Hall are trying to answer, some of the challenges that you're facing. Without any further delay, Jill, I can see you ready and waiting. Fantastic.
I can't share screen at the moment though.
Okay, I'm sure that can be sorted very quickly. The chat is buzzing now, so let's keep that going and hand over to Jill. Is your screen share working?
I think so. Can you see it?
It's looking positive. Yeah, we're good. Over to you. Thank you, Jill.
Right, okay, so thanks very much for having me along today. It's been great to hear all the talks so far. What I'm going to talk about today has already been mentioned a couple of times by Hamish and Duncan earlier on, but it's some work that I've been involved with many other colleagues at the university and more widely, looking at the potential to grow fruit and veg in our cities and towns. And I've been operating at a national scale, and then also down at city scales. But the key for me to understanding how much food we are currently growing and how much food we could be growing is really understanding some basic questions first. And that's what I've been working on over the last couple of years. And the first question is, what food do people want to grow? What food are we interested in growing as a population in the UK? And to understand that, we've been working across the UK, mapping areas of land that household growers in allotments use for growing different food crops. So it's almost looking at the different crops that we value and the amounts of space that we want to use for growing those crops. But then also when we're thinking about growing fruit and veg, we need to understand yield. Now, we've got a really good understanding of yields in commercial systems, but as Fran showed you earlier and talked about earlier, the way we grow ourselves in allotments, in gardens, in community gardens looks very, very different to growing in commercial horticultural settings. So we'd assume that the yields are very different. And so really, when we start to think about understanding potential to grow food and current food production, we need to understand crop yields as well. And that those are crop yields achieved by people across the UK growing in different spaces at different scales, from a very small container all the way up to a big allotment. And so I set up a project called Measure Your Harvest, and I've missed a trick here because I could have been plugging it on the slide. It's myharvest.org.uk. It's a project, citizen science project that's been running now. It's going into its 5th growing season, looking at yields achieved by own growers for one crop, so just the spuds, or all the crops that they grow. And that evidence that we collect from those data is really crucial for us to be able to then say, well, okay, we know that allotments cover this much land, but how much food are people growing? And that's a combination of both that crop yield and the areas of land people use for growing food. And so that work that's been ongoing and has been at a national scale underlies the work I'm going to talk to you about now, which looked within Sheffield, because it's our city, it's the place that I understood the best, looked at what's being grown now and how we might improve and increase local food production. So this is a theoretical thing. We used computer-based modelling to look at the area and really high spatial resolution data sets to look at the areas of land that might be used for growing food. But first of all, we thought, well, how much of the city is an allotment? Because that's the area of land we know at the moment that householders are using to grow food. And we found that about 1.5% of the city's green space was allotment. It declined massively from a peak in the 1950s. And that's some work we've also done nationally, looking at changes in food provision over time. But even though the allotments covered a relatively small area of land, they were feeding about 3% of the population on their five-a-day diet, based on that yield estimate and that understanding of the different crops that people were growing. And you can, if you look at the map beneath the soil-based horticulture text, you can pick out in Sheffield the allotments, and you can pick out, I think, particularly the Mearsbrook site that's really big. It's the light blue colour. So they don't make up much of the city, but they're feeding potentially on the five-a-day diet. But after we'd established that, we then thought about, well, we know that green space actually makes up quite a lot of our cities. You might walk around and see roads and buildings, but those green spaces are interwoven across our cities. And so how might we start to use that green space for growing food? And again, we use this kind of high spatial resolution data sets in a computer to look at areas of land that we could use for growing food. So we knocked out all of the, we knew where all the trees were because we had a layer that told us where all the trees are. So we knocked out all of that from our potential areas for growing food. And we knocked out the key sports pitches and things like that. We didn't discount things like urban parks, grassland in urban parks. That's not to say we should use all of that city to grow food, or all of that grassland to grow food in those parks, but maybe we should start thinking about some of that green space. But when we looked at the area of land that was available, it was quite startling, and Hamish mentioned this earlier, but we found that there were 98 square metres of land per person for growing food in the city. Now, a big part of that was gardens. And gardens are something that are really interesting in that individuals, households can go out and change the way they manage that green space, but they're not distributed equally across the city for people. Some people have gardens, some people don't. But despite that, just thinking about that land resource is an important bit of context. So 98 square metres of land per person in the city. In the UK, we grow just over 50% of the veg we eat, just over half of, just under 20% of the fruit that we eat in a really small area of land. So there's about 23 square metres of land used in commercial horticulture for growing fruit and veg in the UK at the moment. 4 times that potentially available in Sheffield. So that gives you that context, and that land could potentially feed more than the population of the city on their 5-a-day diet. I'm not advocating that we should move all of our green space into food production, but how about thinking about transforming, say, 10% of it? What would that get us? So if we use just 10% of that green space in gardens and in sort of the other bits of green space across the city for growing fruit and veg, we estimate you could feed about 15% of the population. Now, if you start to think about the fact that the UK is about 84% urban, the population, and so our urban areas typically have about 50% green space, then you really do start to see that not only could we start to produce food and make a big contribution to local food production within our green spaces, in our cities and towns, but we could also start contributing to our national resilience by producing a lot of our food locally, particularly when we've got unsustainable production of fruit and veg in places like the Fenland systems, where we're losing things like a centimetre of soil every year for growing our food crops. The other thing that we have in our cities, I've talked about green spaces, but we have a lot of buildings, and quite a lot of them are flat roofed. And they really do provide potential, particularly in the future, to grow fruit and veg in a controlled environment. So that could be an aquaponic system or a hydroponic system. And I'm not really going to dwell on this because it's been spoken about before, but if you think about a complementary system where we're growing in both green and grey spaces, you start to really think about how things could be scaled up. And the image that you can see in the middle of the screen is just taken from the very city centre of Sheffield. And it shows that there's potential to start to grow high value, high yielding crops year round within the city centre. But there are serious challenges that we have to overcome before we can start to transform this food system, before we can start to integrate production. And again, Duncan showed this conceptual diagram in the top right of the slide to you earlier. I'm not expecting you to be able to look at it, you certainly can't. But what we thought about here is what are the barriers preventing expansion of urban horticulture? And what it comes down to are key things. There's a scientific barriers. So things like, how can we grow things in different places? Are there challenges related to soil pollution? There are sociocultural barriers. So things like, what is preventing people from participating in growing food? There's knowledge. So as a society, we're pretty disconnected from food production, aren't we? And we've forgotten the skills. And then there are practical challenges. So, you know, if we want to put a hydroponic system or an aquaponic system on top of a building, we need to check that it's not going to collapse. So I'm going to leave that there and just talk very briefly about the work that I'm doing now with both colleagues at Sheffield University, so Sam Caton in School of Health and Related Research and Paul Norman in Psychology, but also with the Sheffield City Council and Barnsley Metropolitan Council, with people at Food Hall, and with Fran Halsall and Gareth and others, looking at how at a case study level, if we do start to engage people with growing food, if we are starting to get people involved that have never grown before, potentially in growing food in community gardens or in gardens, how do we motivate them to do that? What are the perceived barriers to growing food, and how do we motivate people to participate?
Apologies, Joe, just time.
Time up. Shall I stop?
Just to round up.
Okay, cool. I pretty much finished anyway. If we do start to grow food, you know, what are the impacts on people's health and well-being and on the wider environment? And how can we then integrate this kind of supply of hyperlocal produce safely into supply chains? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jill. You covered a huge amount there, and bringing it together in this project overview there. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, I think moving nicely on to FoodWorks. Renee, are you ready and waiting?
I hope so. You tell me.
Great. I can see you. I can hear you. Over to you. Thank you.
Great. Let me just change my view. Awesome. So yes, I'm Renee. I work with FoodWorks, and we're trying to build a more fair and sustainable food system in Sheffield, and that means we see, and I've always seen, environmental sustainability and social justice as being inextricably linked, really. So I'm really pleased how that's reflected in the discussions today. I thought I'd start with some uncomfortable facts to, I don't know, maybe not the best idea, but the top 10% of earners globally cause about 95% of our CO2 emissions. So that is probably all of us here. We, by holding on to more than our fair share of wealth and using it to fuel our excessive consumption behaviors, are the problem. Our organic veg box and the recycled toilet paper are just a drop in the ocean, really, compared to the impacts from how we travel and all the stuff and the services that we buy every day. Every time we click add to basket on Amazon, and God knows over the past year, I'm sure we have all done it many, many times, we are actually contributing to both poverty and to climate change. And that is a very simple truth, that until we come to terms with it, actually very little substantial, I think, will change. I don't think that's because we're inherently evil or anything like that. I don't want to turn this into some sort of Calvinistic diatribe. But these are sort of learned behaviors, perhaps, that stem from how we are taught to think about ourselves in the world. And so it also means, I think, we can change those behaviors if we perhaps reimagine who we are in this world. So we're taught to see ourselves as consumers, and it's sort of come up a bit with previous speakers, right? We're consumers, independent individuals, looking at the relation to the world as a set of transactions that we are trying to maximize for our personal benefit. And that's how we operate in the world, and that's how we expect everyone else to operate in the world. That's not necessarily the only way to look at ourselves. Before we were consumers, about a century ago, we were subjects. We were part of a hierarchy in which we were duty-bound to play our role, predetermined for us by society. And we were liberated from that oppression of being a subject by becoming consumers. But it means we're also free to now reimagine our world and our role in it beyond consumerism if we feel it is the time to change paradigm. And I think it is. So lots of organizations have been trying to capture what that new paradigm might look like. And the closest useful label I've come across that I think is useful is citizenship. So the idea of being a citizen is about recognizing that we are all a part of an interdependent system and interdependent communities, and that all the actions that we take individually or collectively are continuously reshaping and building the world around us. And that then means we all have a responsibility to act with a purpose in a way that it creates the world that we want to live in. I think over the past year, actually, while in many ways it's been horrible, it's been really interesting and I think nice to see that the rise of mutual aid groups, which I think are exactly about that. And we've seen the power of this idea in how those groups have functioned, and that so many people have had incredible benefits and found it incredibly rewarding to be a part of that active community, although maybe not in the traditional materialistic sort of consumerist sense of the word, but rewarding nonetheless. And so ultimately, I think that is really the essence of what FoodWorks is, or at least tries to be. So we're a community of volunteers and customers and other stakeholders who are trying to be part of and contribute to making a different world together. And then I don't think we all have to agree on exactly what that is, or how we get there, or exactly what contributions are needed at a particular point in time. That is okay for that to all be different for all of us. I think actually the most important thing is that we learn to act from this sense of us all being interconnected. And from there, actually, a lot of good things will emerge. So my view on how we want to maybe try and change the food system isn't necessarily dictated by any particular solution or technology or approach to sort of technically addressing this problem. Is really first and foremost about trying to engage people with being a citizen in our food system. And actually, while that all sounds a bit maybe vague and ephemeral, it has been incredibly successful for us. So FoodWorks over the past year, despite all the challenges, has doubled in size. And actually, we have done it for most of our almost every year in our 6 years of existence. Over the various lockdowns in the past year, we've provided more than 1 million meals worth of food to Sheffield. And the carbon emissions we prevented by doing a lot of that with surplus food are roughly equivalent to the CO2 sequestered by a forest of about 100 acres, or by, say, something like Graves Park. So that's quite massive. So all of that is delivered by a range of contribution that people make as part of our community, whether they might be a volunteer or a customer, or in some way a stakeholder in this idea. And that idea and the core of it doesn't require external funding and subsidies. That idea sustains itself. It's a viable idea. And there's a lot I could tell you about that, but I know we're running a bit short on time, so I thought there might be 2 practical things to maybe share that we're working on right now. In particular, also because we're still very much open to ideas, contributions, partners, etc., around both of these ideas. So hopefully it can be a bit of a seed as well for further work. So the first of that was briefly also already mentioned by Fran, is we're trying to do a lot more around growing food. It's really hard to imagine any sustainable food future in Sheffield without us growing a lot of our food ourselves. It's more environmentally sustainable, it's more healthy, but actually equally important, I think it reconnects people with their food in a meaningful way. It's all about that interconnectedness. So we now have our own little growing plot, which has been made available by Green Estate on a manor. And what we're trying to do there is sort of pilot a growing season to understand the sort of the economics of growing food with the community, and to see if we can develop a replicable, sustainable model of, I guess, something like community-supported agriculture, but working on a basis of more flexible contributions and in-kind contributions. Because if we can make that work, we can roll out growing plots across the city to help communities everywhere in the city grow their own food and sort of help maybe realize, the vision Jill was actually painting earlier. So we started just by trialing that ourselves for this year, but we're really interested to talk to more people who've got access to land or communities who are looking to grow that we might work together with to try more of this out, because I think some of this is probably also a question of scale and what the right scale is for a growing project to be economically viable. It's looking quite challenging, but it's worth trying. The other thing that we're trying to do around growing food is also to actually try and tap a lot of the unused capacity for growing food in the city, or for using food that has already been grown. Like, obviously our roots are in redistributing surplus, and so we are looking to link in more now with local growers to also make sure that things that they have going spare aren't actually going to waste. And aside from commercial parties, actually last year we've also started to work with the Woodseats Allotment Society. Lots of allotmenteers are often producing a lot more than they actually use, and so they actually approached us to share their some of their surpluses with us. And we're now rolling that out this year to try and set up partnerships with all allotmenteers and other amateur growers to see if we can not only maybe redistribute some of their surplus, but if we can work with them to also bring online some of the spare capacities in their often fairly generous plots that aren't always fully utilized, and see if we can get more of the land in Sheffield that is not used for growing but could easily be used for growing, get that online to get more healthy and fresh food into our city. So that's one of our projects for this year. I'd be really interested to talk to anyone who's interested in this growing food, in particular with local communities and local areas. So do get in touch. The other thing I wanted to maybe share is
Rennie, sorry, we're running short of time.
Okay, I'll wrap up. So the other thing is really we're rolling out community hubs. So we've got 11 local partners now in the city. The idea really is to partner with local communities to, if we want to build food citizens and communities around food, that doesn't happen on a city scale level. So we need hyper-local solutions and partnering with hyper-local sort of organizations in communities to as seeds to build engagement around food. So again, we're really interested to talk to any community organizations that are interested to do something meaningful around food in their community, so we can get the entire city involved in discussions around food and being a part of the sustainable food system. I'll wrap up there then.
Amazing. Thanks, Renee. Hearing all about FoodWorks and these new projects, really helpful to get that out there. So yeah, time's marching on, and I'd like to welcome Colin Havard. Are you there, Colin?
Hello.
Hi. Okay. Thank you very much, Renee, and over to you, Colin.
Hello, I work for Sheffield City Council, and I fear from the chat so far that there's an awful lot of things people might expect me to say. But my background is in community development work, and so I got involved in food banks, I guess, when the pandemic started, and the council decided it was going to try and help provide or help food banks source food. It was a fairly top-down approach, as the council might start with, but we ended up understanding that what was on offer in the city was quite comprehensive. There's an awful lot of food banks, different styles, different approaches, and there was some notion that maybe we needed to have something of more uniform or more coherent about it. But as I got more involved in it, I realised that actually the uniqueness was actually a strength, and that we didn't need to do that at all. We needed to find ways in which people could navigate the system. And so, working with VAS and the food banks themselves, we started to look at what collaboration looked like. Where would the council best put its efforts if it was to address food poverty? For me, wasn't looking at the food growing part of it. Other parts of the council are, but about the food poverty angle. And so we we ended up doing a process where we used Megan Blake's food ladder system to look at which organisations were doing catching activities, which ones were doing capacity building, and which ones were doing transforming. Not because we were suggesting that any one of them was right or wrong, but because we needed to understand where the gaps were. The mapping helped us understand that the system was that complicated that actually those of us working in it didn't understand it, and therefore those people who were newly in need of those support also were going to struggle to understand where they should go realistically. How would you know where your nearest food bank was and whether it's the right one for you or the wrong one for you? And what sort of extra support did they have? What was the difference between what you might get from FoodWorks and what you might get from S2 Food Bank? And so this led us eventually to creating a food poverty working group from the scrutiny committee, by which point they went out and asked people for evidence for them to consider. And they ended up with an understanding that cash first was an issue for them, was a focus for what the council ought to be thinking about. However, what they also recognised was something which probably everybody here realises, which is that the council doesn't understand where food poverty sits in its remit at the moment. So there are various officers working on it from different parts of the council. There are various councillors interested in it, but there isn't as yet a very clear leadership role. So one of the key outcomes of the food poverty working group was that the council needs to work that out for itself, but also work out its role within the broader picture, because it's not just for the council to lead on, as many people have said today. All of this kind of is coming to a head a little bit with the notion of the financial cliff edge that has been talked about at the City Partnership Board and ably led or inputted by people like Debbie. And Debbie's thing about poverty being structural, I think, is beginning to hit home. What it does mean, though, is that for councillors who are working on a very short time scale, often too short for some of us, they need actions that they can see. How do I do X, Y, and Z? And so, rather than looking at where the end point of the journey is, what's the next step in that journey? And I think that today's event is helping with this, because what it's shown is the vast array of knowledge in the city already. And that actually, if we can make this complicated system somehow more legible to all of us, and work out, as the chat's been saying, work out what the next steps are, then there are some opportunities. I don't know if the current political situation is going to help us or not help us. It's certainly going to make things change a bit, but there's always opportunity in that. I think that, as Renee has said, the notions around mutual aid and how we are moving towards a more neighbourhood-based approach to lots of the council's services, that's also helpful. But I think that we will have to remain vigilant that actually we take everybody with us, and not just those that are already empowered, those that already understand the options in front of them, but a full gamut of people. And at the moment, as we slightly have demonstrated today, we're not representative of our whole city, and we're certainly not representative of those people who are most suffering from food poverty. So I'm going to do us all a favour and stop short at that point.
Hi, Colin. I had a feeling you were going to stop there. I was ready and waiting.
Well,
okay.
You see, it has to be said that Ursula is much more interested than me, so there you go.
Well, absolutely, and I think it'd be nice to have a bit of time. Ursula, are you ready to present?
I am ready to present. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Gareth. I'm Ursula Myrie. I'm the founder and managing director of Adira, which is a survivor-led mental health and wellbeing service. that specifically supports Black people with mental health issues. I'm here to talk about innovative work that we have been doing in the Black community in terms of food poverty. And the truth of it is, it's not innovative in the slightest. It's just, to us, it's not innovative. It's just basic common sense that if you are Black, you would get it and you'd understand it. In order for you to understand about what we did and why we did it and the reasons behind it, it's almost the same thing in terms of, you know, working with the Black community. In order for you to understand us as people, whether it's about mental health or food, then you have to understand our past, our culture, our history, because you can't separate them. You can't separate me as a Black woman from my past, from my culture, from my history, and then say you want to help me with food poverty or you want to help fix my mental health. The two are connected. They're all connected. They're all intertwined. And so I don't want to go too far back in terms of you know, bringing up our history and where our love of food and more importantly cultural food comes from for us. I wish Emmett was still on the chat, because I really wanted to commend her, and I pay lip service to no one. So when I say something, I mean it. I really wanted to commend her on being so transparent in regards to what Food Hall are doing. And when she said, you know, they don't have a lot of non-white people there. The majority of the people that come to their food bank are white. The majority of the staff or volunteers are white. And is it a case that they're not coming to the right places to meet the need? Because we always say in the Black community, stop asking us to come to you. You come to us and meet us where we are, because a lot of the damage and the pain and the trauma was caused by white people. So come to us if you want to help to fix us. So let's talk about food in terms of our culture. I'll only go back as far as slavery. I don't know if many of you will be aware of this, but if you look at, I didn't want to do slides, couldn't be asked. If you look at things like this, these are hairstyles. And these hairstyles are called cornrows or cane rows. And it stemmed from slavery, where if you were a slave and you were on the cornfield, then you did cornrows. If you were on the cane field, you did cane rows. And one of the things that used to happen with these hairstyles is it became, for us, you know, these styles are very beautiful, they're very intricate. These were actually, in the days of slavery, the hairstyle was a map. And for those of you who know your history, know about the Underground Railroad, which was the escape route the slaves used to take to escape the plantations back in the day. It wasn't an actual railroad, it was just a name given to the escape route. And what the slaves used to do was, the women especially, they used to do these styles, these cornrows, and they would put rice. You can see there, the mum is putting rice into the parting in the daughter's hair, and then they would cornrow over the rice. So you can see there where she's done the plait, she's done the cornrow, and you can't actually see the rice anymore. And I guarantee once it's in that style, it doesn't fall out. And why they would do that is because, one, the hairstyle was actually a map. It wasn't just a style, it was a map to let the next slave know this is the route to the Underground Railroad. But also mothers would put the rice seeds into their hair when they knew they were going to escape, in order to feed their children along the journey on the Underground Railroad. So that been passed down from generation to generation of how food saved our lives. And it wasn't just any food, it was culturally appropriate food. We love our rice in the Black community. These are some of the things that make us have an attachment to the food in the Black community. When slaves were first taken from their countries, and words would spread to slaves who hadn't been taken yet, that when you get to these plantations, there is no food that we can eat that is good for our bodies. The food was so bad that it would cause things like brittle bones among the slaves, the food that they were fed, and it would have such a negative impact on their digestive system, their immune systems. It would make their hair fall out because the food wasn't culturally appropriate for them, and it wasn't the type of food that they would eat. So these things we know have been passed down from generation to generation in the Black community. So when it comes to food banks, Emmett answered this question herself when she said, the reason she thinks that white people don't use food banks and some of the others in the city is because, one, you don't look like me. And I've experienced personally, so this isn't me saying, you know, what other people, other service users have told me. I have personally experienced racism at certain food banks, who I won't name here because I'm not trying to throw anybody or any organizations under the bus, but I've gone there not to use the food bank, but to volunteer at these food banks. And the racism I experienced, the way I was looked at as a Black woman, like, what are you doing here? Because, you know, we really don't need you. I was looked at very suspiciously if I would be putting food into my car to transport from a supermarket to the food bank. You know, people would be checking to make sure I completely emptied my car, that I wasn't taking, you know, none of the food home for myself personally. So that's one of the main reasons we don't use food banks, predominantly white. If I turn up at a food bank as a Black person and you ask me, how am I? And I say, I'm fine. And I ask you, what did I just say to you? You're going to say to me, you said, I'm fine. Listen to me again. How are you? I'm fine. That sound that you heard at the end of that word, the end of that sentence, that sound in the Black community, we have a saying that says there's 10,000 words in that sound. And that sound means I'm not fine. I'm telling you I'm fine, because you know, especially in the current climate, we've all become professional liars. You know, everybody asks everybody, how are you? I'm fine. Are you okay? I'm fine. How? Everybody's fine. But when you hear that sound from a Black person, I've told you in 10,000 ways, I am not fine. And if you ask a Black person that question and they just say, silence, nothing else after, they're telling you that I'm in so much pain, I'm in so much trauma, I can't even talk, I can't even tell you what the problem is. Unless you understand those things, how can you say you're setting up a food bank for us? So when the first lockdown happened, I remember, you know, looking at all these food banks springing up and thinking, oh God, you know, I've got to do something, because no self-respecting Black person is going to use a food bank. This is the joke we have in the Black community, because your food is not culturally appropriate for us. Your staff don't look like us. Your services are not culturally sensitive enough for us to understand our needs. I've heard people being told, well, if you're hungry, you will eat. So, you know, imagine you're born, you're raised as a vegetarian or a vegan, you've never eaten meat in your entire life. You turn up at a food bank and you explain this to them and they say, oh, well, we've got some tinned steak here, or, you know, we've got tinned chicken here. If you're hungry, you will eat. Not realizing the impact that has on you as a vegetarian. One, somebody who's never put meat in their body before to suddenly have to put meat now. And two, the impact that has on your mental health. And you mix culture into that. You've got an explosive mix there. So we decided then to set up something. It wasn't innovative. All we did was change one word. We changed the word bank and called it pharmacy. And it became a food pharmacy. And we said to the Black community, food is medicine, come over here and take your medicine. And that's how we got them. Because with anything with the Black community, you can't go straight on. It has to be carrot and donkey, but it's got to be the right carrot with the Black community. And so we said food is medicine. And during the first lockdown, when we had the food pharmacy, we served over nearly 3,000 people. 99% of whom were Black through the food pharmacy that we ran. When we did the Christmas, when the first lockdown happened and everybody was focused on the here and now and what's happening, I kept saying, what about Christmas? What about Christmas? Is anybody thinking about Christmas? And people were like, no, let's just think about now. Let's talk about now. And I said, look, people are dying in real time. People are losing the main breadwinner, whether that's the husband or the wife. People are losing their jobs. Come Christmas, people will be eating toast on Christmas Day. This is going to be one of the worst Christmases we've ever had. Is anybody thinking about that? Nobody wanted to engage with that conversation. So I went away, I got some funding. I had some specific, beautiful Christmas boxes made. We had 4 hampers made up for Christmas. We had 500 hampers, 4 different types of hampers. So we had a vegan hamper, a vegetarian hamper, we had a Caribbean hamper, and we had a meat hamper. And what we did was make sure that the meat in the hampers was chicken and it was halal, so that it covered everybody. And we gave those out to the community. And, you know, for 500 hampers, we had over 1,000 requests. But it's not about being innovative. It's just about knowing the community that you're trying to help, knowing the community that you're trying to engage. I'm not Muslim. I don't understand about the Muslim community. I'm not a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian. I don't understand about any of those things, but I educated myself. I found somebody who knew about being a vegan, who knew about being a vegetarian, and said to them, right, you do those Christmas boxes, you sort out the food, source the food for those Christmas boxes. I will source the food for the Caribbean Christmas boxes. So it's not about being innovative or having to come up with something really mind-blowing and out of this world. It's simply about educating yourself about the community that you say you are trying to help. Thank you.
That needs a moment of reflection. And we've not had that moment at any point in the past 3.5 hours. So it's a challenge like no other. And thank you for bringing that to us, Ursula, in a way that is eloquent about something that I think we all still have so much to learn. Okay, you have brought us to the end of the sessions, Ursula, with so much to think about. Like everybody who has spoken today, shows us all how much complexity and how much nuance there is in the food system and the challenges that we face, both in food and through food. We've got a very short amount of time remaining in order to wrap things up within a reasonable amount of time from the planned 4:30 finish. We've got a quick poll. This is an opportunity to give us your opinion on kind of broad directions around food strategy, a silver award to sustainable food places, and big questions like self-sufficiency. So please have a look at that poll. And just to wrap things up, I'm not going to attempt to try and weave together all of the different talks into a single statement. I feel that there isn't enough time, and I feel that we're all here with a full understanding, to some extent or another, of the huge challenge that we face in tackling, the sustainability of our food systems and all the related issues that come out of those challenges, whether it's the climate emergency, whether it's health inequalities, whether it's access to food, whether it's dignity and a sense of self that is absolutely a human right that we have to respect and maintain, and food has a key role in achieving that. There's so much to bring together. I do want to hopefully wrap things up over in the kitchen. So do we have a quick 30 seconds just to go and see what's been going on in the kitchen? The live feed. Oh, wow. Okay. So spin the camera around.
Can you see what it says? Here it says Sheffield, and then out of the first F, FOD, Festival of Debate, then the second F in food, and the second O in food, out comes Opus. Dad will tell you what that stands for because I cannot remember.
Opus, darling, are the Opus Independents who are responsible for organising the Festival of Debate. So have you ever seen branding like that, guys? Amazing. cupcakes for the Roberts. Thanks very much for making those. So yeah, that was the first live feed as part of the Feeding Sheffield Sustainably event. A quick round of applause around the room for the live feed team. Okay. And how are we doing, James? Are we doing any more polls? Oh, Madam Zucchini. Hello.
Isn't there one more poll, Gareth? The special poll that you mentioned.
Special poll.
Well, there might be a takeover. I think we've got some hackers actually. Sorry, at the end here we held it together so well. Do we just have a quick poll? We ready?
Where is it?
So you've got about
Come on,
20.
strongly agree.
We've got about 20 seconds to do the poll, and we will go with the answer. So if everyone could strongly disagree.
Strongly agree. Strongly agree. Strongly agree. Strongly agree.
You better.
So before we get that, I've managed to get Boris in the room. Unfortunately, he's wearing his mask, so he won't say anything to us. But I will be passing on your concerns and making sure that he's listening.
Okay, well, I think. Oh my goodness! Are you gonna make it?
Come on.
I'd just like to say to everyone that voted strongly agree that you know, I'm always game for a laugh, and the idea of a squirty cream pie in the face.
Dad, take off those glasses. 3.
You're gonna show it. Look.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
You don't mind?
Don't do that. Oh my goodness. So has anybody got anything they want to say at the end of this wonderful event?
Look at me. Can't see a little. On my nose.
I just love the sound of the food pharmacy, and Ursula's right. It needs to be the right carrot, doesn't it? The right carrot to get people involved. So,
well,
with her on that one.
I'm always up for, you know, taking a challenge, and I don't know if this is the right carrot, Madam Zucchini. It doesn't.
You look nice. You look lovely, and I think
it doesn't feel like a carrot. It's quite tasty though.
Carrot, good. I think after all that, a lot of input, then a bit of cream pie in the face is probably an appropriate kind of antidote, isn't it?
It tastes great. I don't know. And food, wonderful.
Yeah, I've never been to a big event this year online where it's ended up with a man talking about how tasty cream is on his face. But anyway, there you go.
I'm just waiting for somebody else
James
to say
has come
something.
in quick to cut us all off.
I
Quick.
think we've seen enough actually.
You left me hanging
even
for
more
ages there.
I know, right? Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming today. Really good session, really powerful session. Lots to reflect on. Thanks, Gareth, for chairing. Thanks, Madam Zucchini, for all your wonderful work. Thanks, everyone, for speaking. Thanks, all the team behind the doors. Really appreciated. Take care. Be good to one another.
Love you. Bye.
Everybody.